Morning. Good morning, everyone. Mic test. Okay. Colonel Redmond, can we get you soldiers to sit down or stand up or salute or something? One of the things we pride ourselves on is running on time, and we're at about 8:57. So if everybody would like to get a seat, and anybody who isn't sitting down, Colonel Redmond's going to take and drag you out by your heels out into the hall. So I was talking to someone in the lobby. Listen up, folks. Listen up. Let's get ready to go. I was talking to someone in the lobby, and I said, "Oh, there's Colonel Redmond. He's speaking in the afternoon." And someone said, "Well, what does he do?" I said, "He kills people for a living. So when he tells you to move, get moving." So anyway, he'll be in charge of discipline and orderly conduct over the course of the next couple of days. And so we got a timer. Are we 8:58? David, one of the things that we do try and pride ourselves in doing is being on time. So we've got about 2 more minutes for everybody to get sitting down, and then we'll get started. And I think everybody has an agenda in their package. Nadine Wellwood and Paul Himman, like you're going to be talking to Colonel Redmond if you're not sitting down. We've got about 2 minutes to get started. There's only one change in our agenda, which I'll tell you about in a minute. And so once we get to the 9 o'clock, and then we'll go from there. So David Hines, sit down, or you're going to be talking to Colonel Redmond. Yeah, there we are. Now we're going to get everybody sitting down. Tom Harris is here, and Bob Smith is going to say an opening prayer in a minute. And for about the last 5 conferences, he said the prayers, and I always introduce him as Bob Mills, which is, I've got Bob Mills' name stuck in my brain, and I gave Tom a ride down from the airport yesterday. He said, "Oh, I used to be an executive assistant for Bob Mills." I said, "Gee, don't even say that name to me. I have trouble getting it out of my mind." But in any event, in about 1 minute, I'm going to ask Bob Smith to come up and say the opening prayer. One of the things that we pride ourselves in doing is starting our meetings with a short prayer, and reminds me of the old Jewish fellow from New York that was, he was rushing downtown with one of the biggest contracts of his life, and he got to the place. He was just minutes before he had to have the contract in, and he's looking at his watch. He's driving around the block with his Mercedes or whatever his expensive car was, and he couldn't find a parking lot. And he said, "Please, God, find me a parking spot, and I'll take a third of the contract, and I'll give it to you, and I'll come to church every week or synagogue wherever they're going." And anyway, drives around. There's still nothing. He stops and he says, "Please, God, find me a parking spot." And he said, I'll give you 40% of the contract to the synagogue, and I'll come there every week, and nothing. He drives around again. He closed his eyes. He said, "Please, God, find me a parking spot, and I'll give 50% of the money or whatever." He opened his eyes, and there's a parking spot there. He just pulled in and parked, and he said, "Never mind, God, I found one myself." So lest we think any of us got here without God's help, we'll get started by asking Bob Smith to come up and say the opening prayer. Art Hanger, we're saying the opening prayer. You better be listening.
When anybody ever introduces me and does it incorrectly, I usually say, "I've been called worse." And I quite often do that myself when I will meet someone and think I know their name and it's incorrect. Then I usually have to correct myself. And I usually say, "Probably been called worse, right?" At any rate, Bob Mills, great guy, sitting at the table with me here. In our country, God was always recognized. And we're going to do so this morning. And whether you wish to open or close your eyes or whatever, I am going to ask that you stand with me. And I'm having some difficulty with my sight.
I'll hold the microphone for you.
Yeah. So just so I stay on track, I do have a magnifying glass, but thank you. O Lord our God, we stand before you this day, as usual, a needy people, in need of guidance, in need of answers, in need of solutions, new directions for not only our province, but for this country in particular. The old hymn says, "O God, our help in ages past." And there was that dependence on you, O God, that we don't have these days. But it also says, our hope, and perhaps you are our only hope, God, for years to come. Thank you for the wisdom and the guidance of the great array of people that we have that are going to speak to us this day, O God. And we thank you for their wisdom and guidance. One of the individuals that walked this earth many years ago was a man named Jesus, full of wisdom, full of love, full of compassion. Once in a while he would get upset, but he would usually make sure that love became a part of what followed. But we're going to in particular mention Jesus in a very special way. A new song that is out says this: I just want to speak the name of Jesus to every heart and every mind. Break every stronghold that may take place here today. Shine through the shadows, burn like a flame. We encourage each one of you to share concerns that you have in these moments with God. And, O Lord God, we invite you, we need your presence to be with us in every moment of every session of this conference, we pray. In the mighty name of Jesus, amen.
Amen. Thank you, Bob. So thank you for being here. We've got a busy couple of days. We've got a great group of speakers. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Regina Manifesto. Yeah, a few people, yes. The Regina Manifesto I've seen different versions of it written, but it was written in the late 20s, early 30s by a group of socialists in Regina who their goal was to create a socialist utopia on the prairies. Some of them had just come from, Eastern Europe, so I don't know why they wanted another socialist utopia over here, but in any event, they did. And they had a list of things that they wanted. They wanted to get control of the school boards. They wanted to get control of the education system. They wanted to get control of the municipal councils. They wanted to get control of the bureaucracy. Of course, they wanted to get control of the universities, and they wanted to get control of some of the political parties and the political establishment. And when you look at it now and you go down their list, it's just sort of check, 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 check. They've got it all done. So we really are in perilous times, in difficult times, and generally speaking, I would say our country is sort of like Europe in 1940 or 1941, like we're surrounded by the bad guys, and a lot of times it seems like they have the high ground. So what we're trying to do, I think what we've been trying to do with our Freedom Conferences, what we're hoping to do today is sort of turn the tide and start fighting back. And one of the problems that conservatives have is, we consider ourselves more principled maybe than the left, and I generally speaking think that we are, but we all have about 100 principles, and even though we agree on 90% of each other's principles, we'll end up arguing with each other over the 4 or 5% that we don't agree on. So one of the things that we've been striving to do with our Freedom Group is to we call it like create sort of an intelligent, respectful discussion where we invite people from both sides of the spectrum or with all different opinions, and we talk about this. And, I think what we're striving to do is say, look, on the things that we all agree with, let's all work together on. And if we don't agree with someone on some little thing, let's let that be, but let's not pick on them. So let's just, generally speaking, work together. And Eric Lowther and Art Hanger are here. They've got a pretty good little group of people going now called the Network of Networks. And like I said, let's get all these networks working together. And I guess over the course of the next day or two, one of the things I'd like to talk about, John will be doing more talking than me, fortunately, and but one of the things we'd like to do is look at what our options are, and then hopefully we'll come to an agreement to try and work together to achieve some of them. And so that's, I guess, my hope is when we leave here is we'll have sort of a renewed enthusiasm to work together and keep fighting the battle we're on. I was on Andrew Lawton's show yesterday. He was talking about, he was talking about our freedom conferences. He said, how's it been working out for you? I said, well, there's good news and bad news. And I said, the bad news is things have got worse in Alberta every day. We've had the Economic Association. So I said, I don't know if but I said, the good news about that is enough people are starting to be worried about how bad it is that more people are starting to pay attention. So, I think we've got a good group of people. We've got a good group watching online, and some of our presenters are actually going to be online today. And I said that's the other good, if there's any good thing came out of COVID, we sort of learned how to do this virtual stuff almost as well as a thing. So we've got a lot of people at home that don't travel anymore that you can sit and watch and be involved in what we're doing. And as you know, some of these senior citizens like myself have a lot of time to work on some of these issues. So anyway, thank you all for being here, and without further ado, I'll bring up John Robinson to, I guess, tell us where we're going for the next couple of days. Welcome to Alberta, John. Nice to see you back.
Well, thank you very much. It is indeed great to be back here. I don't know, if Canada had a land of the free, it would be Alberta, and if people listen to the EEA, Alberta would be a land of the free, and we will do what we can in the next couple of days to move in that direction for the sake of the province and the country and Western civilization as a whole. I mean, if you're going to dream, dream big, right? Pardon me. Also, can do go away. Nothing without a great deal of technological prep first. There we are. Yeah, well, I was just mumbling to myself about technology. When I have something to say to you that's potentially interesting, I'll try and do that. One of the reasons I like these gatherings, because we always have such cheerful topics on the general principle that firemen run into burning buildings, not away from them. And Western civilization today really does seem to be a burning building. And what's even more concerning is that the arson seems to be coming from inside the house. And the big reason that we're here this year is to ask, why does Canada and the West generally seem to be bent on destroying itself? And how do we make it stop? It's not that we don't have enemies who are keen to destroy us, but they're on the whole even dumber than we are. The real problem is what we're doing to ourselves. And those of you who have heard me speak before will be aware, first of all, that one of my duties is to police the time for the speakers, and then Colonel Redmond will deal appropriately with those who do not heed my gentle direction. And of course, this lays upon me the obligation to get whatever I'm rambling on about done in my allotted time, and I will try and do that. And what I intend to talk about primarily is ideas. I'm an ideas guy. Every time we get together, I cite this book by Richard Weaver with the title, Ideas Have Consequences. And it is one of those titles so good that it kind of saves you the trouble of reading the book, because it just says it all. Ideas matter. Good ideas create good actions. Bad ideas create bad actions. And what is wrong today is bad ideas. So although we will have all sorts of discussion getting into the details of policy, We are fighting ideas. Now, a hand may go up at the back saying we're fighting principalities and powers, and I'll say, yes, okay, true. But we're fighting them on the battlefield of ideas first and foremost. David, can you get my slideshow up here because it's better than my talk? Okay, I like to fill my slideshow with engaging pictures. I think this year it's pretty much all boring text, but I did try and choose the font to be pleasing. And the first slide that you cannot see up there refers to a line from Malcolm Muggeridge, who, having lived the bad life to its fullest, became a Christian convert, a terrific apologist, and he talked about the great liberal death wish. And Conrad Black quoted that fairly recently and called it the great capital L liberal death wish. But I think that is a little too narrow, not that it's unjust, but even, if Justin Trudeau's liberals are keen to wield the torch or the guillotine or whatever it is that they would like to use on our heritage and our country, they're aided and abetted by the NDP, by the activists, other social democratic parties, academics, celebrities, these mobs chanting in the street. The people in power in this country may not be innocent, but they're not exactly giants either, are they? And when you think of the great figures in history, you're not always thinking of good people. A lot of them are quite alarming. But you also don't think of the people running Canada. They will not be in the pantheon. They are as much symptoms as causes. And that isn't to say that one does not, when one has a medical condition, try to treat the symptoms as well as getting to the cause. But I do think that we have to go deeper. And again, as those of you who've been here before know, I'm not a big believer in conspiracy theories, partly because I don't think people are clever enough, but also because, as Thomas Sowell said in A Conflict of Visions, and the first time Danny invited me to one of these conferences and I couldn't make it, but I recorded 3 videos about books that I thought were extremely important, which is sort of the thing I would do. And one of them was Sowell's book. It made a huge impact on me when I was in graduate school. I'm astounded. I spent a lot of time in university, and during that time I read a lot of good books, and almost none of them were on the course curricula. So that was kind of weird even back then. But Sowell wrote this book because he said, I find myself arguing with the same people over and over again on a range of issues that appear superficially to be unconnected. Back then it was the minimum wage, aid to the Nicaraguan Contras, and abortion on demand. Well, today only the third of those still seems to be a live issue, really. But he said this way that the people line up happens too often to be coincidence, but it's too uncoordinated to be a plot. And to me, it really is that there are certain kinds of ideas that tend to produce a flourishing society, and there are certain kinds of ideas that tend to destroy a society, and our institutions and popular culture have by and large been captured by the wrong ones. Now, there's another book that I had long intended to read by James Burnham called Suicide of the West, an essay on the meaning and destiny of liberalism. And I finally got it as an audio book, so I listened to it while walking the dog. Thank you. There we are. And I actually thought the title was a lot better than the book in that case. But the point of it fundamentally is that liberalism seems to be a set of ideas that, as was summed up by John O'Sullivan, every practical defeat for the West, from Suez to Katanga, is rationalized as a moral gain for humanity, and thus for universal Western values. And O'Sullivan called liberalism a sedative. I think it's a little worse than that. They give you a sedative and then they give you something else, right? So we're in a lot of trouble, which I say not to discourage you, but to inspire you. You have somehow or other, like Elrond's counsel, we have been called together to do works that are great. And if we seem like an improbable bunch to be asked to do it, well, we're here and they're not, so it's up to us. And we're just going to somehow or other snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Another, slide 3, please. And another of these quotes, these things are everywhere, and they start to be ominous, is a line from Arnold Toynbee. I can't advance them, right? Okay, there we are. civilizations die from suicide, not murder. And again, I think this is the case, not again, that there aren't people wanting to murder our civilization, but they don't even have to bother. And again, their attempts are often quite feeble. Ours, on the other hand, one of the scary things about Western civilization is how good it is at whatever it is currently doing, including, alas, destroying itself. And in the course that I teach a history of Western civilization at Augustine College in Ottawa, and one of the challenges I put to the students early on, I say, when you think about Western civilization and its extraordinary dynamism, its habit continually of questioning itself, of changing things, of asking, what is this about? Why do we do this way? What kind of idiots are we? And so on, is whether the seeds of the current disaster were not inherent way back at the beginning when Greece led to Rome and then to Christianity and so on. Was it always there? And there's again, slide 4, if we can get to it, which is, in the West, it is the exceptions which break through the universal. And in this is rooted the perpetual disquiet of the West, its continual dissatisfaction, its inability to be content with any sort of fulfillment. And that's a somewhat ominous passage, partly because it implies that if we ever really did create the good life and arrive at the truth, we would just keep on going. So it's not impossible that at some point we really did kind of get it right, and then we just kept on questioning and undermining and producing a disaster. And there's no flip solution to that, because this perpetual disquiet, this interest in the exceptions, this willingness to hear the other side of the story, is the strength and the glory of the West. It's our capacity to make room for dissenting ideas, for dissenting habits, even dissenting cultures, and to adopt what is best and discard what doesn't work, that makes Western civilization the beacon and the challenge to everybody. That there is no part of the world today that is not westernized or else in bitter revolt against westernization, because all of this stuff works. As Julius Caesar once said, slide 5, please. Slide 6. According to Sallust, anyway, he said, our ancestors, gentlemen, never lacked wisdom or courage, and they were never too proud to take over a sound institution from another country. In short, if they thought anything that an ally or an enemy had was likely to suit them, they enthusiastically adopted it at Rome, for they would rather copy a good thing than be consumed with envy, because they had not got it. And that is why the West towers above the rest of the world on any measure that you look at: GDP, military strength, Nobel Prizes, cultural compositions, morally rotten or morally inspiring. It's the West that creates the novel. It's the West that creates the symphony. It's the West that creates Parliament. It's the West that creates the university. And then we eat their food, right? You could be in a fairly small town in rural Alberta and you would find cuisine from around the world, made with much, more wholesome and abundant ingredients probably than in the place where it originated. And we wouldn't want to be one of those societies that have this stifling mediocrity. The places that anytime someone comes up with a new idea, they go, haram, and start throwing stones. We wouldn't want to be like that. But the trouble is, along with the best food and music and so on, we also have the best decadence and death wish, right? The center cannot hold. All things fall apart. And this is a huge problem, right? You'd think that the West could make room, for instance, for gay couples without undermining the traditional family. That seems to be what we're like and nobody else, that we could have a dominant religion but not persecute Quakers for not taking their hats off, or atheists or other people who don't share those habits. But increasingly, it's starting to look as though that's not true, that somehow the exceptions have broken through and overwhelmed the rules. And remember what Yeats warned about in 1919, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. I think you see that everywhere. And again, my challenge in large part here is that we must not lack conviction. And here's an interesting sort of trivial example of all of this. Canada has a special representative on combating Islamophobia, and we would, right? And she recently whinged that over the past several months, Canadian Muslims have shared their growing concerns about an increase in anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, and anti-Arab backlash that has already led to loss of income, threats to current or future employment, harassment, violence, vandalism, and exclusion. She didn't cite any examples, but what she was talking about is that people don't want to hire you if you're militantly pro-Hamas, right? And slide 7, I shall quote that great commentator on public affairs, me. I responded on X, Canadians have the right to free speech, but not to speech without consequences, because others have the right to free association, including not hiring people whose views they abhor. If you object to this deal, you're exploiting freedom, not upholding it, right? The exception is breaking through, and they are using free speech in order to stifle the speech and other rights of other people. And the question is, can we hold the line? Because if this person got into power, there is no chance that you would be allowed to draw a cartoon of Muhammad. No chance whatsoever. And one of the weird things about this situation that I think increasingly all know is true, slide 8 please, this comes from Jay Budachevsky. And again, there's so many inspiring people here. Jay Budachevsky was an existentialist philosopher at the University of Texas at Austin who thought things through just a little too deeply, and Christ found him, and now he is a very deep thinker and theologian. He said, previous civilizations have degenerated. Previous ages have marched into the dark, not knowing that they were marching into the dark. But in any previous time were artists, scholars, and thinkers so eager to explain that degeneration was really progress. And there again, you have the problem that confronts us when we try to make things right, is people say, oh, you hate money and progress too, do you? And we have to convince people that the suicide of the West is not progress, and it's really hard. All right, I have the power. Look what's happening in Canada today. The public, to some extent, and those in authority, to a very large extent, are shrugging off fiscal ruin, foreign agents in Parliament, mass immigration overwhelming us from the housing to culture to religious tolerance, the arson of churches, and they're calling it progress. And again, I can go on citing these warnings endlessly. I'm sorry I don't have pictures instead, but Malcolm Muggeridge again. Previous civilizations have been overthrown from without by the incursion of barbarian hordes. Ours has dreamed up its own dissolution in the minds of our intellectual elites. Not Bolshevism, which Stalin liquidated along with the old Bolsheviks. Not Nazism, which perished with Hitler in his Berlin bunker. Not fascism, which was left hanging upside down from a lamppost along with Mussolini and his mistress. None of these, history will record, was responsible for bringing down the darkness in our civilization, but liberalism. A solvent rather than a precipitate, a sedative rather than a stimulant, a slough rather than a precipice, blurring the edges of truth, the definition of virtue, the shape of beauty, a cracked bell, a mist, a death wish. That's pretty bad, right? To borrow a line from Captain James Tiberius Kirk, don't mince words. What do you really think? Ambrose Pierce once said that self-evident means evident to oneself and no one else. But it does seem to be more and more evident that the West is committing suicide, and that the people who don't like the West aren't unaware of it, they're just glad. The process itself is becoming more and more visible. And one of the good things about that is that more and more people are objecting to it. For instance, this is in the National Post, Avi Ben-Lolo of the Abraham Global Peace Initiative. By attempting to force Israel into a ceasefire with a madman with an end-of-time plan, the international community, whatever that is, reveals an utter weakness that is undermining Western civilization. So there's one symptom. It depends what you're interested in, where you might particularly be inclined to see it. Michael Schellenberger, again, a former progressive who is caroming rapidly in the right direction. Why do civilized people hate civilization? This is an excellent question because, again, if you look at those encampments, civilized is about the last word that you would use for them. Remember somebody at National Review years ago describing these young people looking as though they'd shown up late for the sack of Rome. And again, that line I quoted from Ronald Reagan at dinner last night, they don't look particularly capable of sacking anything, but since we're going to do it for them, that's not a big deal. And then there's Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a Muslim apostate who has recently embraced Christianity, that for a time many refused to believe that anything was actually wrong. The tide of populism was a momentary manifestation of frustration. The decline of each of our institutions was viewed in isolation as a problem of poorly selected leadership, which could be corrected after the next election or a changing of the guard. The sense of hopelessness that people felt was explained away as the temporary consequence of the rapid transition away from industrialism and the ushering in of the digital age. In this light, though there were problems, they were distinct from each other and would be corrected in time. Can any serious person believe this now? And again, never underestimate the capacity of serious people to believe serious errors. But I think there is a certain encouraging recognition that things that have been underway for a long time, because some of my examples are quite old, I mean, as non-historians use that term. In fact, there's a line from C.S. Lewis that the practical result of education in the spirit of the Green Book must be the destruction of the society which accepts it. And of course, education is very much in the hands of the kind of people he was talking about in The Abolition of Man. So, I mean, I don't probably need to point out to people in this room how bad things have gotten in education, that the universities have succumbed to madness, to the point, especially in the humanities, as they were once known, or the liberal arts. Even if they wanted to hire conservative faculty, they couldn't, because no conservative now gets a PhD. When I went to graduate school, the situation was already troubling, but my dissertation advisor was actually a Republican. He was an Eisenhower Republican, but times had changed. When he was a kid, in his house, if you said the name Roosevelt, you had your mouth washed out with soap. So his parents were not Eisenhower Republicans, but times changed. They wouldn't use the dime when it had FDR's face on it. But you also see this mass immigration, right, which is clearly driven not by the fact that we need more houses for all the immigrants, so we have to bring in immigrants to build houses for the immigrants, and then more immigrants to build houses for the immigrants building houses, but by a hostility to Western culture, that it is a deliberate policy choice across the Western world to bring in large numbers of people from non-Western civilizations on the grounds that their values were better than ours. And when you see the Hamas people disrupting the Pride Parade, you get confirmation of Edmund Burke's jibe that birds of prey are not gregarious. So again, there are some internal contradictions on that side, but we need to worry about our own. And then you get the problem, for instance, of the Canadian military. Even the American military is in some trouble, but our military, we could not fight anything bigger than a smuggling operation. We don't have the personnel, we don't have the ethos, and we don't have the ammunition. And so what do we get in the middle of all of this? Lieutenant General Jenny Carignan. You know, that's just what I think we need leading us in battle against the savage hordes, as someone who goes by Jenny. And this National Post story says, Carignan takes over a military in transition amid the ongoing culture change efforts and the urgent task of trying to rebuild its ranks after years of declining recruitment and poor retention. And it didn't apparently occur to the journalist any more than to Jenny there that maybe these two tasks contradict one another, that maybe the relentless determination to undermine the warrior ethos is why people don't want to join the military. And thank you. And again, I'm going to come back here to the ideas have consequences issue, because if you're wondering, did the Prime Minister do it on purpose in order to disarm us? I think the answer is no. I think the Prime Minister is a much greater fool than that. I wrote about this back in February for the Aristotle Foundation, another sign of hope, by the way, that such organizations are springing up. Our problem is not that the Prime Minister aims to subject Canadians to foreign conquest or is indifferent to our security. Rather, he and those around him are genuinely convinced that in the long run, only a truly woke society can ever be secure. They actually believe social justice warriors will fight better than traditional warriors. And in case they don't, everyone will love us, so it won't matter. That's what's going on in Ottawa. This is actually how they're thinking. And if this pattern of thought has a certain kind of deliberate depravity to it, it doesn't mean it's not sincere. There is nothing worse than sincere depravity. There's almost horrible naivete that C.S. Lewis talks about in Paralandra. And again, I've said this before, and I'll say it again, especially if you try to give me a conspiracy theory. When people say something you don't agree with and do something you don't agree with, it's because they think something you don't agree with. And if they're wrong, it has consequences, as in Canada's current crumbling woke military. The reason people don't accept our conclusions is they don't accept our premises. And that's why I say that we are fighting primarily on the field of ideas here. And there was another line, when Russia invaded Ukraine, John Kerry objected to it being a distraction from the true crisis of climate change, which he called existential. And someone said the existential crisis is caused by people like him. If we're going to die, we should at least try for death with dignity. And John Kerry's the last person capable of providing that. That was Conrad Black again. Don't mince words. And I know there's some disagreement, probably including in this hall, about how central Ukraine is to the defense of the West. But I don't think there's a lot of disagreement in here that the defense of the West is important. And that's the thing that a lot of people really, truly don't agree with. Remember, right after 9/11, that Sunera Tobani out at UBC said that women would never be free globally until American influence was eradicated. Now, there's a weird read on history, but not a fake one. She really meant it, and that's a bad thing. So, and you're moving on. There's all these other areas where we have these problems. For instance, our heritage, right? Toppling statues of Sir John A. Macdonald and Queen Victoria in broad daylight with no criminal consequences. And in the United States, they just took Laura Ingalls Wilder's name off a U.S. Children's Book Award because of the anti-Native and anti-Black sentiments in her work, right? Little House on the Prairie is now Little House Down the Memory Hole. And then I got this thing from Audible. I've become a big fan of audiobooks. I don't know, I'm too tired to read when I finally get to bed or some feeble thing of that sort. But as they were trying to convince me to listen to this, the Mongol army led by Genghis Khan subjugated more lands and people in 25 years than the Romans did in 400. True. In nearly every country the Mongols conquered, they brought an unprecedented rise in cultural communication, expanded trade, and a blossoming of civilization. No, they didn't. Vastly more progressive than his European or Asian counterparts, Genghis Khan abolished torture, granted universal religious freedom, and smashed feudal systems of aristocratic privilege. What? Seriously? It's like there was a display on the Vikings at the Smithsonian back in 2000 that said, in a way, the Viking longship was the internet of the year 1000, connecting places and people who themselves could not even imagine what lay beyond that wide sea or that mountain range. And I'm pleased to say that the journalist writing about that one back then got in touch with an expert on Vikings who... At the Viking Center in York, who retorted, they didn't call him Eric Bloodaxe because he was good with children. So, common sense and plain speaking will get us a long way in the face of this nonsense. But, you know how bad it is. We've got the Prime Minister agreeing that there's a genocide in Canada while he's Prime Minister and not stepping down, let alone surrendering himself for trial. This is an assault on the meaning of words, right? As I recently said, that means either he doesn't really think there's a genocide, or he doesn't really think genocide is bad, or he doesn't really think he's in charge. And to some extent, I believe it's the latter. Trudeau is the resistance to the establishment, this mythical beast that actually perished around about 1966. And this is also true in Australia. I've been following stories, and they cut the funds to a Shakespeare festival down in New Zealand because of the fact that Shakespeare is paternalistic and a canon of imperialism. And this was being objected to. They said, instead we should have legends from the Maori heritage. And, I don't mean to seem uncivil, but are we talking about the time where you ate your enemies? Because that's kind of bad. Right? I mean, Shakespeare may be many things, but an advocate of cannibalism as a religious practice was not on the list. And another place, of course, where you see this problem, and again, this is maybe is the worst one, is the the demographic suicide of the West, the fact that Western people don't have children at replacement rate anymore. This is an astonishing abdication, an abandonment of hope, right? Having kids is the ultimate expression of hope because you will never sleep again and everything will be dirty and your kids will sass you. I often see parents with young children with, there's some wonderful place and the kid's having a screaming fit, and I'm thinking, this isn't what you imagined when you said to one another, let's have a baby, is it? But we've all been there, right? I remember a guy that I TA'd for down in Texas. One time he was on a flight with his very young daughter who was, of course, crying. And somebody next to him said, is your kid going to cry throughout the whole flight? And he said, yeah, so you might as well move now. But it's astonishing, this demographic winter that is taking over the entire Western world. I mean, it started, people who lose wars with the West go into demographic decline, right? That's where it starts, from Spain to France to Russia to Japan. But then the West itself is getting into this situation. There was actually Dan Gardner, who I used to work with at the Ottawa Citizen, but who kind of went from being a libertarian of normally sane proportions to being I know not what, mocked the idea that the Pope had put forward that godlessness was to blame for the baby bust, because he said, well, it's worldwide. And the answer is, yeah, well, so is godlessness, right? It seemed fairly straightforward to me. And I also, as a challenge to all of the best and brightest in the societies, if there's no babies, who are you going to socially engineer? And of course, lots of countries are now trying to pay people to have babies, but that isn't why people have babies. Especially because you can't pocket the change, then drop them through the orphanage slot. And a classic Norwegian imam who said out loud to a Norwegian newspaper in 2006, we're the ones who will change you. Just look at the development within Europe, where the number of Muslims is expanding like mosquitoes. I thought, no, if I were to compare Muslims to mosquitoes, doubtless I would have a visit from the thought police. But this was an imam doing it, so take my word for it. And I saw this in a souvenir store almost 20 years ago. So there are so many examples of this, and again, we'll talk in more detail about them as we get our many splendid presentations on such a wide range of issues in the next couple of days. But I want to mention that if there's been a fascination in the West with the phenomenon of civilizations that decline and fall, at least since it happened to Rome, or possibly go back to Athens and say, well, here was a civilization that did everything right, just about, and lost the Peloponnesian War, and became an adjunct to these Romans who bought art by the ton. So that was a bit of a come down there. Gibbon thought that Christianity had done it because it made people wimps. Augustine had to answer that charge right in real time. People said, oh yeah, the empire went Christian, and now look at the mess. And I could give a whole lecture on that, but I won't. Instead, I will quote the Pope, previous Pope, Benedict XVI, who said, Europe is infected by a strange lack of desire for the future. Children, our future, are perceived as a threat to the present, as though they were taking something away from our lives. Children are seen, at least by some people, as a liability rather than as a source of hope. Here it is obligatory to compare today's situation with the decline of the Roman Empire. In its final days, Rome still functioned as a great historical framework, but in practice, its vital energy had been depleted. And I would have liked to say to him, Your Popeness, I think you overestimate people's historical knowledge. I think there's a lot of people out there not comparing the present situation to the fall of Rome because they know little about the present and nothing about the fall of Rome. But nevertheless, I sympathize with the concept. Are we living through something we've seen before with similar causes and similar consequences, including turning our backs on the notion of normal domestic life as the greatest felicity that a person can enjoy who has had 18 hours sleep in the last 5 days? And so the various theories exist about why history goes in cycles, why you have this pattern of the rise and fall, including this notion that vigorous people generate wealth and security make people decadent, decadence causes them to lose their vigor, and so on. And there's some argument in favor of that, but I'm going to say, let's not get hysterical here. for two reasons, and one of them is as a revisionist Marxist, Edward Bernstein supposedly said, but I've never been able to track it down. If he didn't say it, he missed the opportunity of his lifetime. Men have heads. People actually think. They think about what they're doing. We are not chemical experiments. I'll get back to that later, too. But the other question is whether, as Toynbee also implied, civilizations generically follow common patterns, that a Chinese dynastic cycle and the fall of Rome are essentially parallel phenomena. And I'm going to say no, the West is different. For better or worse, the West is different. And one of the reasons the West is different is the West has a story. It is an unfolding of something that goes from a starting point to a finishing point. And it's not coincidental that the Bible is the same. I mean, a lot of people talk as though all religions were just cut from the same cloth. They all think God is love. They all say don't kill one another. They just wear different funny hats. But that is not true. That is wrong on so many levels, including that no other scripture is a historical story. The Bible, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And how did man come to be corrupt? What did God promise to do about it? What did God do about it? And what are we meant to do about it? And how does it all end with the fireworks of Revelation? Right? The Quran's not structured that way. Roman mythology, such as it was, a pile of rubbish atop Mount Olympus, had no comparable structure. And history as a discipline of inquiring into the past to try and figure out what happened and why and what does it tell us about what's going on now is a uniquely Western thing. So I'm going to say no, Western civilization is different. Its decline and fall, if they happen, will be hideously dramatic and unlike that of some Chinese dynasty whose principal contribution to the world was yet more phony historical marks on excellent pottery. But this is about 4 years ago almost. Terence Corcoran, who's a tremendous columnist with the Financial Post, he did this piece about what on earth has gone wrong, saying we had the Enlightenment brought us so many gains, like the 18th century. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? Well, yeah, in the 18th century we were there yet. Right? We had parliamentary democracy, limited government, flourishing culture, the great musicians, the great painters, everything. It would have been time to just sit down and party in the sunlit uplands, and instead we went on to one disaster after another. And I had answered back that if the 18th century was that great, it is difficult to see how it contained the seeds of its own destruction. That there must have been things going on that were more ominous than he was giving them credit for. And it's even conceivable, I have to say. I suggested it might go back to the end of the Middle Ages, and he said, I'll leave that to you. And I said, your proposal is acceptable. That the Reformation, not to ruffle feathers here, but there is a certain issue. William James pointed out that if God is omniscient and omnipotent, we are puppets. There is nothing that we can do to change the course of destiny which his will has from the beginning delineated and decreed. Calvinism and fatalism are the logical corollaries of such a definition. The same test applied to mechanistic determinism issues in the same results. If we really believed in determinism, we would become Hindu mystics and abandon ourselves at once to the immense vitality which uses us as marionettes. Of course, we do not accept these somber philosophies. The human intellect repeatedly proposes them because of their logical simplicity and symmetry, but life ignores and overflows them and passes on. Well, maybe it doesn't, right? Maybe, and I shall argue this without exceeding my time, I hope, maybe that's what's happened to us. And I don't know if you've ever had the misfortune to encounter, I'll skip that, Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, these three 18th century masters of deep sleep. Incredible soporific prose. No need for a sleep aid if you read these guys. But what's really interesting about them is that they look like the most improbable radicals because they wear frock coats and wigs. But the three of them in the field of philosophy do something quite ominous. They turn it away from looking at the world and asking questions like, what is justice, to asking, how do we know anything? How can we understand a world using flawed minds? And then the next problem, of course, becomes, how can we understand flawed minds using flawed minds? And philosophy sucks itself up into its own navel. And this is actually, I will go back to the previous slide because this is from C.S. Lewis, the fate of John Wither in That Hideous Strength. This, when disaster overtakes him and his diabolical plans. He said, incredible how little this knowledge moved him. It could not, because he had long since ceased to believe in knowledge itself. What had been in his far-off youth merely an aesthetic repugnance to realities that were crude or vulgar had deepened and darkened year after year into a fixed refusal of everything that was in any degree other than himself. He had passed from Hegel into Hume, thence through pragmatism, and thence through logical positivism, and out at last into the complete void. The indicative mood now corresponded to no thought that his mind could entertain. And again, I'm going to suggest that we live in a society that is dominated by this idea, that only the self exists, that there is no true knowledge, and that therefore our will is the only thing to substitute for it. But in a phrase I cherish from a former United States Senator Malcolm Wallop, essential questions thrown out through the front door often climb back in through the window. Reality is hard to get rid of. And as Chesterton also said, there is in this materialism a mad indifference to real thought. By disbelieving in the soul, it comes to disbelieve in the mind. And so when I talked at the beginning about this fight over ideas, it's really a very deep fight over the possibility of coherent thought. We're in deep water here, folks, and we might as well know it. It goes on from Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, it gets worse. In another of these, hey, the 18th century was great, what on earth has happened to us? Neil Postman asked in kind of panic, what self-understanding is there defined in the 20th century? Freud's insistence that reason is merely a servant of the genitalia. You think, well, how did genitalia get in here? What first thing in the morning? But it's funny how often people start talking dirty when they stop believing in real ideas, including those about morality. And then you get stuff like this, first man ever on the cover of Vogue wearing a dress. And I have this in my files under brainless, horny giggle. But it has this kind of philosophical basis that we don't believe in the mind anymore. And indeed, in some sense, we can't. Daniel Boorstin, this back in the 50s, he said that in the time of the American Revolution, men were inclined to take their opponents at their word. The revolutionary debate seems to have been carried on in the belief that men meant what they said. But in this age of Marx and Freud, we have begun to take it for granted that if people talk about one thing, they must be thinking about something else. Ideas are treated as the apparatus of an intellectual sleight of hand, by which the speaker diverts the audience's attention to an irrelevant subject while he does the real business unobserved. But it's worse than that, because the speaker is themselves in the grip of either Marx's socioeconomic forces or Freud's dark subconscious sexual ones, and thus doesn't themselves understand what's going on. As Marshall McLuhan put it, it's often said that the major development of this century has been the discovery of the night world of dreams. By day, we are the bottom half of a double boiler. We are all steamed up, but we don't know what's cooking. Funny thing about McLuhan could sure turn a phrase. He couldn't write a coherent paragraph, which is funny for a communications guru. But you see, what did happen is that we went on from Locke, Berkeley, and Hume to, again, this guy writing about Freud, the explanation of the irrational is a special task of the 20th century, but if you're irrational, good luck with that, mate. And so here's one of the villains of the piece. And I bring this up partly because, like, everybody was young once, right? It's always funny to see a picture of somebody as a kid, and then later on you go, oh, Charles Darwin, as some people see him, who, when he died, was buried in Westminster Abbey, because that's what you do with distinguished people in Britain. But Darwin, of course, wasn't just an atheist. He was the proponent of a theory that, if taken seriously, necessarily abolishes God and man with it. Because according to Darwin, everything that you do and everything that you think is the product of your genes trying to make more of your genes. And they're good at that, at least sometimes. Some animals go extinct pretty quickly. But any thought you may have, including about morality, is just a trick of the genes trying to make you reproduce successfully. Now, the downside is that's also true of Darwinism. But, it's hard to know what to do about that. And then you got Karl Marx, and Marx says, no, phooey, it's not genes, it's socioeconomics, right? Your relationship to the means of production determines everything you think. And therefore, none of your thoughts are really yours, and you have no free will, and you have no head, and you are just a robot acting out class interests. And then you get Freud, and he says, no, it's all sex. You're basically a really bad, dirty book. And then, again, who is this kid? Any guesses? It's Groucho Marx. No, it's Albert Einstein. And so Einstein had the theory of relativity that proved that everything was relative, or so people think. It didn't, but nobody knew that. And so on and on and on it goes with a civilization that stops believing in belief. Stops believing in ideas, stops believing in truth, and then all sorts of dark things get loose. Now, Philip K. Dick, who's a science fiction writer, at least nominally, but a philosopher in real life, said reality is that which, when you stop believing in it, it doesn't go away. And of course, there's always been people pushing back on this. And they've been pushing back because people have realized from the beginning what a dismal picture of the world this was. Nobody wants to be in a deterministic universe. And as Edmund Burke said, I allow that if no supreme ruler exists, wise to form and potent to enforce the moral law, there is no sanction to any contract, virtual or even actual, against the will of prevalent power. On that hypothesis, let any set of men be strong enough to set their duties at defiance, and they cease to be duties any longer. But it's a lot worse than that, because if there's no such thing as truth, you couldn't have a duty even if you wanted to. And again, this is so prevalent. This is just from some random textbook of American history. The past, of course, can never change, but our understanding of the past changes constantly. Well, in that case, why write the book, right? Because, then our understanding of the past will change, and it'll change, and it'll change. And none of those understandings will have any value whatsoever. But point it out as you will, each generation interprets the past, including art, according to its own needs. There is no truly objective history, only our interpretation. So I can look at the Mona Lisa and think it's an anti-war protest, or you can look at Guernica and say it's a pastoral scene, or you just skip the art gallery altogether, because if you went in there, you'd just make something up. In some sense, this is completely preposterous, but it's everywhere. The director of San Diego's Museum of Contemporary Art said, with respect to the content of the work, and whether we think it is a good artwork or a bad artwork, we really have no position on that. To which one might say, then how do you decide what to include in your museum? But, it's sort of wasting argument on imbecility. And then there was this, the Atlantic Daily emailed me a thing, why no singer has replaced Lady Gaga? And I'm immediately like, why would you want them to? Apparently the explanation is that there is no new superstar singer as thrillingly meaningless as Lady Gaga. I was like, okay, fine. Your proposal is acceptable. What's thrillingly meaningless about whoever this person was? Not one of whose songs I would recognize, I hasten to add. Or this puff piece on Cardi B's outfits, and I don't know who Cardi B is, but that's not an outfit. That looks like she shot a rug, right? And the simple truth is this stuff is ugly. That's what this is. There's a clear, pertinent truth. And yet, recently Bob Plamondon wrote a book, The Truth About Trudeau, which reminded me why I hated Trudeau Sr. as much as I did. And it was reviewed by Andrew Cohen, who's a marquee columnist and professor in the Ottawa Citizen, and his review ended up with, ultimately Plamondon has his Trudeau and I have mine. So again, this is casually asserts that there is no truth about Trudeau. And so we can all have our own Trudeau. I don't know, maybe he's got 7 arms or something. Maybe he's still alive. You're like, what? This doesn't even mean anything, but of course it's not meant to. Or this, are you kidding me? Citing religious rights and the dark prophecy of a terrible black snake that will bring harm to its people, a Sioux Indian tribe returned to court Tuesday in an 11th hour push to keep the Dakota Access Pipeline from carrying its first crude oil. And the thing about this, it's not so much the gall of it, is that nobody believes the pipeline is the snake of some terrible prophecy, not even the people saying it. But the problem is, none of them believe anything. So you might as well say this. And people out of politeness will not say bosh to your big white snake, or black snake. Or this one again, a Huffington Post piece a decade ago. Every woman has her own definition of success, but there are certain traits that most successful women share. So not every woman has her own definition. And again, I can think of things that aren't in any woman's definition of success. Gambia could become the first country in the world to reverse a ban on female genital cutting, for instance. That surely is not any woman's definition of success, or at least not a sane one. And all of this is obviously nonsense, which is good because we have to get rid of it. As C.S. Lewis once put it, no thought is valid if it can be fully explained as a result of irrational causes. And materialism, Darwinism, Marxism, Freudianism, deconstructionism all say that all thought is the product of irrational causes, including the one I just articulated. Therefore, it goes down in flames. As Lewis also pointed out about his conversion, my argument against God was that the universe seemed so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? Because we all know that there is truth. We all know there are things that we have to do. And indeed, James Shaw said, to prove that reason is valid presupposes that reason is valid. But the same is true of proving that reason is invalid. If you want to abolish reason using reason, you are necessarily relying on reason, and we shouldn't let them get away with it. It's ridiculous that we get buffaloed by these people. And again, Lewis says, if nothing is self-evident, nothing can be proved. Similarly, if nothing is obligatory for its own sake, nothing is obligatory at all. And there's this poem recently published, well, recently as I would use that term these days, "Let reality return to our speech." Okay, this is the critical thing that has to happen. This is the call to action here, as well as the program for this conference. Again, Louis, you can't go on seeing through things forever. The point of seeing through something is to see something through it. You want to see through the window to the garden, but what if the garden's transparent? Again, Chesterton, that same tu quoque, I deny that biology can destroy the sense of truth, which alone can even desire biology. No truth which I can find can deny that I am seeking the truth. My mind cannot find anything which denies my mind. And by the way, somebody did a poll and found out that 2/3 of American millennials didn't know what Auschwitz was. That may be one reason why, but at the same time, they're out there fighting evil, right? So they're not actually, nobody cannot believe in this stuff. And I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but that's the whole of Yeats' second coming poem, but we won't do that because I am bent and determined, I know that. And I'm also trying to get down through my... So another warning about reality from Aldous Huxley: reality cannot be ignored except at a price. And the longer the ignorance is persisted in, the higher and more terrible becomes the price that must be paid. And that's where we are now. But Christianity always rises again because it has a God who knows the way out of the grave. So our job here is to speak the truth firmly, not unpleasantly, and not to let them get away with saying there is no truth, because that's the ground on which we win or lose the battle, fundamentally. We have to bring up specific ideas of truth, which is what our speakers are going to do. We have to stand firm when it's challenged, but we must not let them say everything is relative, that's your truth, this is mine. It is not possible to build a civilization on that basis, and though the West necessarily goes there, it doesn't stop there. It doesn't perish there. It goes on to a much wiser, more mature, and powerful understanding of the truth. And that's what we're here to do.
Thank you very much, John. That's exactly what we're here to do. We talk about Twitter, and I said Twitter is a great thing for people who work for someone else because it gives them something to do when the boss isn't around, or gives you something to do when Danny's speaking. But nevertheless, while we're talking about Twitter and getting the message out, actually on Sunday, we're going to be back here in this room. John's going to talk again at 1 o'clock. It's just going to be a public meeting. We're going to send it out to our political supporters, and some PPC is going to send it out. John will be speaking about the power of telling the truth, and Maxime will be doing the same thing, and so will Paul, talking about the power of telling the truth. And someone asked me why we didn't advertise it. I said, well, we didn't advertise it because we wanted people to come here first. But for someone who just has the afternoon, wants to talk to somebody about that or listen to John talk about it, Sunday at 1 o'clock we'll be back here. We're on a break right now. Somebody said, well, who has a conference without coffee? And I said, well, quite often the people who have to pay for the conference. And in 2019, I didn't read the contract, but Pat did, and she said, well, they're charging us $3.50 a cup for coffee. And I said, well, yeah, they'll just bring out an urn of coffee, and it'll be that much per urn. You know what I mean? So what's the problem with that? Well, I can tell you the problem with that was when we got the bill for food, it was $12,000. When we got the bill for coffee, it was $8,000. And so if you're wondering why there's no coffee here, it's because coffee cost $8,000 last time. So I guess the water stations are at the back, and I apologize for not having coffee, but that's why we don't have it. So anyway, we've got a... Thank you very much, John. We've got a 15-minute break, and then we've got Patrick Moore actually isn't going to be here. He was planning on being here, and then earlier in the week I was talking to him, and he said, I'm really not feeling very good. He actually feels like he's suffering from a vaccine injury. He said his ears are his ears are ringing, and his nose is running, and his throat is dry. And he said, I just really. When he first said, well, he said, I'll just present from home. But anyway, I talked to him yesterday. He said, Danny, I just don't feel up to it. I'm suffering from anxiety. And so he apologizes for not being here. He's been a real regular, which we've come to love him and his presentations. But in any event, he's not going to be here. But as luck would have it, Tom Harris had volunteered to come and speak to us, and we were trying to figure out a place to put him in the agenda, so all these things work out for good. So let's take a quick break. We'll be going again at 15, and 10:15, and Tom Harris will be talking to us about something which I'm not exactly sure what, but I'm sure it'll be good. So let's take a break. Thank you very much.
In Ontario, there must be a distance of over
Thank you. And thank you for that question. Absolutely, it can't. We can't just look to electrifying everything. We just can't look at batteries. If we're going to phase out fossil fuels, if we're going to meet our goals, we have to look at completely reducing our demand for energy, and we've got to look at increasing our use of renewable resources.
Okay, folks, here's your, what is it, 30-second warning? If I get out of the camera, maybe the clock will come back on. Okay, Ron Voss, Doug Bebb, Ron Davison, Michelle Sterling. Let's everybody sit down. The last one standing has to help wash dishes. Roger Soon, Jim Ness, you're going to be back in jail again. We've got Jim Ness here. He's one of the fellas that went to jail trying to get his wheat across the border. Our friend Tom Jackson, who's usually here, also went to the border. Tom Jackson went to the border with a truckload of wheat, and in the old days the law was you could take bagged seed wheat across the border. So Tom Jackson put a big tarp in his semi-trailer and he filled it up with wheat, and then he sewed it up with one of those sewing machines. He put the blue export tags every 2 feet, along the tarp, and closed it up, and he went to the border, and the inspector came out and said, what are you hauling? He said, bagged seed wheat. And the guy said, well, I want to see that. Art Hanger. Hey, Art Hanger. It's everybody, you're going to be helping do the dishes. So anyway, the border guy came out and they rolled the tarp back, and there's this big, ladies, hey, Kim, you're gonna have to put your display out in the hall if we catch you doing that again. But anyway, they looked at this big tarp with all these blue tags on it, and the inspector said, it can't be that big a bag. And Tom said, it doesn't say that in the legislation. And the fellow said, it will. And they impounded his truck. I think it took him 6 or 7 months to get his truck back. So when some of us like Jim Ness have contempt for the government, I think we have some pretty good reasons for it. But that's not what we're here to talk about right now. We're here to we have Tom Harris talk to us about all the things he's been doing in Ottawa, and he's got plans to help us all fight back. So please welcome Tom Harris from Ottawa. Thank you, Tom.
Hey, thanks, Danny. Get the first slide on there. Well, thank you, Danny, and good morning, fellow freedom fighters. Yeah, because it's freedom that's at stake if the climate scare is not stopped. It's not just that we'll be bankrupt, hungry, and freezing in the dark for no environmental benefit. It's actually our very basic freedoms that are at risk. We're going to be told what we can eat, where we can go, what kind of car we can drive, where we can live. You know, it's interesting. The cost is astronomical. For example, Ross McKittrick from Guelph University, he just calculated that net zero plans so far, just to this point, have added about $55,000 to the cost of an average home. So for young people who want to buy homes, well, good luck. The cost is going to be through the roof. And, oh, look at this, it does work. Yay! And we'll be restricted in where we can live. It's not just 15-minute cities, it's 5-minute cities, maybe even 1-minute cities. So if you want a great illustration of the loss of freedom, the 15-minute city is exactly it. Why is it the authority of anybody to tell us where we can go? Okay, places like Oxford in England, they already are bringing in the 15-minute city. They have little video cameras that record an indicator on your license plate, and you can only cross between certain zones a certain number of times, after which you get a massive fine. Now, the costs, as I said, are astronomical. You know, it's interesting, a leading Canadian bank 2 years ago said, oh, we support net zero by 2050. Oh, by the way, the cost is going to be $2 trillion. Okay, now 2022, the federal government budget announcement, they said, well, it's going to be $125 to $140 billion per year until the year 2050. Now that's almost $4 trillion. Now, so these kinds of prices are absolutely incredible. We have to ask, how did this happen? How did it actually get to the point where worries over a trace gas, carbon dioxide, which is the primary greenhouse gas that we emit in Canada, other than water vapor, how did it get to the point where we are so concerned about this benign, life-giving gas that we would charge up to $4 trillion to try to restrict it? Well, here's what happened. You see, climate alarmists now dominate all of our major institutions in society, and the list is huge. Their education system, completely climate dominated. I'll just tell you a funny story. I used to speak at high schools, and the kids love challenging authority. Okay, so I would get up and challenge lots of authority. And then one day I got a call from a principal just before I was due to speak. He said, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cancel your presentation. I just got a call from the school board, and they said that what Mr. Harris is saying is against government policy. And of course, these teachers and the principal work for the government, so my presentations were all canceled. Corporations throughout all of our society, government at all levels, our churches, the military, the media. You know, it's just incredible how much has happened. So what should we do? What should we do about it? Well, the answer is pretty obvious. We should use many of the same tactics that were used by the extremists to take over our institutions in the first place. So we have to look at how did they do it. And it's interesting because I read a book a little while ago, I should have read it years ago, called Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Okay? Now Saul Alinsky was a community organizer in Chicago, and he published that book in 1971. And he wrote it for people who were on the outside who wanted to get on the inside. And at that time it was, you know, the very left who were on the outside, and conservatives were running the show. Well, now it's entirely different. So I know he'd roll over in his grave, but we have to pay attention to what he said. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we used his rules for radicals to fight back against climate alarmism. And what we did in Ottawa is we identified fairly early that there was a very big risk in the last election. Catherine McKenney, who was a councillor and a climate extremist, she had what appeared to be an insurmountable lead. Okay, now she supported some pretty crazy things. I'll just show you because this is a great example of what we're planning to bring across Canada through Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy. She supported $250 million more for bike paths. Now, I'm on those bike paths practically every day. I couldn't see why we need Cadillac bike paths when we're turning people away from rehab centers for drugs. Okay, I mean, it's kind of a bad priority. The city had a declaration of climate emergency. Now, you have to say, where's the emergency? 1.2 degree rise since 1880. How is that an emergency? I mean, you wouldn't feel it in your entire life, but it was passed during COVID, okay? So nobody really noticed. It was done behind the scenes. The city had a climate change master plan, an energy evolution. And of course, she's treating fossil fuels like nuclear weapons. She's supporting, and the city supported, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. Sounds very dramatic. Well, how would you do this? What would happen? Well, you'd have to phase out all use of oil and natural gas, all of it, okay? And various things here. I'm just going to talk about the fifth one, converting Ottawa Hydro to all wind and solar generation. Now, what would that involve? Well, here we go. Change the slide. It would involve 710 industrial wind turbines taller than the Peace Tower, okay? There's one in comparison with a home to give you some sort of perspective. Now, that presents a little bit of a problem, as we'll see when one of our volunteers was questioning the candidates. They have to be a half a kilometer from a home. So where are you going to put 710 industrial wind turbines? There had to be 36 square kilometers of solar panels. Well, those are solar panels in the winter. So they're going to give you not too much power because the sun isn't up for very long, but a lot of the time they'll be covered with snow. They wanted to have 122 large containers of batteries. Now, isn't that great? You probably heard in the near blackout in Alberta back earlier last winter that they had massive battery packs. They came into force, okay, and they were boasting about their battery packs, how they were giving all sorts of power for 10 minutes. You know, it's interesting because the largest battery pack in the world is in California, and it could power the state for 102 seconds. And yet, you get wind droughts that'll last for 5 days. Okay, and of course, this is the major reason that the Texas blackout was so bad. They were heavily reliant on wind power. When it got very cold, there was no wind. Suddenly, bam, they lost about 40% of their power when you count the wind and solar together. And of course, up to 700 people died. Okay, and that's coming here if we don't stand up to this. There we go. Now, the costs are unbelievable. When I've shown people the costs, they say, no, that must be the cost for Ontario. No, that's the cost for the city of Ottawa. In other words, a city of 1 million, it's almost $60,000 per person. It's unbelievable. Now, of course, they're hoping to get aid from the federal government. They want to have source of funds would be property taxes, road tolls, tax everywhere, okay? So you can't even drive around the city anymore without paying a lot. They're talking about something like 40% increase in property tax just to pay for their climate plan. So in contrast to the objectives of the Climate Change Master Plan, which was to convert Ottawa into a clean, renewable, and resilient city by 2050, instead, it'll be converting Ottawa into a polluted, fragile, and bankrupt city. Nobody would want to even live there. You have to say, well, why would it be polluted? Well, you look at the sales of home generators in parts of the United States where the grid has become very weak. You want to have stocks in those companies, okay? I mean, it's gone through the roof. And of course, they're powered with fossil fuels of one form or another, perhaps propane, perhaps diesel, whatever they are. And that produces a lot more pollution than simply having a natural gas pipeline coming into your home. So the net result would be more pollution. So ICSC Canada, who I work with, I'm on contract to Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we started to publicize how absolutely ridiculous this was. And I have to thank Rebel News. They have a subscription of 1.7 million now. So some people say, who's Rebel News? You know, alternative media. Yeah, and it's more than 10 times the subscription of, let's say, the Ottawa Citizen. So yeah, a lot of people hear you when you go on Rebel News. And you can actually see me. I'm the most recent person that was interviewed by Sheila. Sheila Gunn-Reid, who's a lot of fun, actually. So Rebel News were very, very good. Various other media sources picked us up. It's pretty tough to get published in Canada when you're saying these things. The Sun media chain published us a few times, occasionally the National Post. We also had podcasts. I brought in Madhav Kandekar, who is a former Environment Canada scientist, who explained that, no, there's no increase in extreme weather, and that is his specialty. He's one of our advisors. We had letters in the Epoch Times, Rare Foundation in the United States, and we did host some podcasts. We actually had Zoom presentations in which Bob Lyman, who's our economics advisor with ICSC Canada, and by the way, I have business cards, I'll hand them out afterwards, of both CSCP and ICSC. But yeah, so we did a lot of things, and we finally published a report. Now, in the report, we didn't say there's no climate scare. Okay? The reason why we did that was because we were afraid people would say, oh, it's a bunch of deniers, and they wouldn't read the rest of our report. So the first report we put out talked about the fact that it was infeasible, it would cost a fortune, there would be huge environmental and social impacts. So that was the first report, to actually get people to wake up. But you know, that's not really enough. I mean, the left didn't take over our institutions simply by putting out reports or writing articles. They organized citizens, okay? That's the major, and I'm seeing right here, Action for Canada. Check them out, actionforcanada.com. They are taking action, and they were one of our main sources for volunteers to help speak out to fight the climate scare. So what we're doing is using Alinsky's rules, and I'm not going to go into very much detail on that. I actually have an article in America Out Loud today. Go to americaoutloud.news, and it talks more about Alinsky's rules. But I'll just give you one of them in particular, because CSCP, that's Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy, there's their website, sensible-change.ca. They're planning to replicate what we did in Ottawa, which I'll describe in a second, all across Canada, okay? So, now power, this is the first rule. Power is not only what you have, but what an opposition thinks you have. So if your organization is small, you have to make a lot of noise. Now, what we did is we told the volunteers, and we had, as I say, volunteers from Action for Canada. And I just love Action for Canada. They have so much courage. Not only do they learn about the issue, so whatever they're speaking on, and Tanya's speaking tomorrow, whatever they speak on, they know what they're talking about, okay? Because one of Alinsky's rules is never go outside the actual knowledge of your people. You want people to have a good, solid grasp of what they're talking about. Another one of Alinsky's rules is purposely go outside the knowledge of your opponents, okay? Because that creates insecurity and uncertainty, and that's exactly what you want to do. And you'll see, I'm going to show you a couple of videos of some of the Action for Canada volunteers who worked with us. I'm going to show you some of the videos of them following these rules. So, we also handed out flyers at various events. You can be sure that everybody at the mayoral debates were getting these flyers. It was quite fun because one of the volunteers was standing outside, a very strong, brave lady, very polite, and was handing out flyers. And an environmental activist was furious and started to swear at her and give her a really hard time. She handled them so well that other people who were just walking by said, "Oh, I want one of those flyers." And so he sort of sulked off. So, I mean, if you have the right strategy and you're confident, you get more interest from people, not less. Now, I'd like to show a video here which demonstrates another way that you can actually make your group seem bigger than it really is. Okay, we're going to play a little video here. It's just the end of one of my presentations to the City of Ottawa Environment and Climate Change Committee. Now, the thing I want you to focus on is not so much what I say, but the audience reaction. And don't play it quite yet. At these particular meetings, these committee meetings, the audience are told to be quiet. Okay, they have to be quiet. They can't say, they can't clap, they can't cheer, they can't do anything. Well, unknown to me, there were about 40 supporters, most of them Action for Canada people, who were there and watched the reaction when I finished my speech. I thought I was going to get boos. Well, watch what happened.
Personally, and to present our findings to a committee or to the full council. We're convinced that following Ottawa's plans will leave us bankrupt, hungry, and freezing in the dark for no environmental benefit. I look forward to your comments and questions. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. So the point is this. Even if you don't want to speak out yourself personally, you should go to help support people who do. So what Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy are doing is they're having a kind of activists called Pathfinders. And we're going to show you their webpage in a second, but you just click on it and you'll be added to a database, and there'll be artificial intelligence within the CSCP site that sends you information that's related to your interest, because when you register, you indicate your interests and what your background is, what you're prepared to do, that sort of thing. So I encourage everybody here, take a look at the homepage of Sensible Change. I got to get the website right, eh? sensible.change.ca. We'll get back to it in a second, and maybe we can put the slides on again. Here we go. Yeah. Now, this next one, oh, by the way, yeah, do register to be a Pathfinder, because you're not committed to speaking out, but you'll be kept up to date on what's happening. So, for example, if there's a meeting in your community, or if there's a major development, that people have to know about, you'll be told that right away. And people who want to speak out, I'll be working with you to help train you, or at least help you in the technology. If you're already a good speaker, you don't need any training. Or if you know the technology, that's great. But the bottom line is we're creating a team, okay? We're creating a team to do what we did in the city of Ottawa, but across Canada. So let's watch one of our teammates, and I'm going to actually tell you something fun about her. Well, I'll wait till after I show you. Let's show her first. Yeah, I'll tell you a fun story about her just before we show it. Danielle Mayo was the head of the Ottawa chapter of Action for Canada. And she worked with me. I gave her the information she needed. She customized the question for herself, okay? And you'll see that. She says, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and that's exactly what you want to do. Now, I was quite surprised that she was such a good speaker, because it's not her first language. So I asked her, how did you do that? She said, well, Tom, before I went to the microphone, I left the room, I called a friend of mine on the phone, and we prayed together. So when she came to the microphone, she was solid. She was solid, and you'll hear she spoke slowly, clearly, and with total confidence. So here we go. Let's hear Danielle Mayo with a question.
The City of Ottawa plans to back up its wind and solar power using a huge amount of batteries. But we all
Thank you, and thank you for that question. Absolutely, we can't just look to
The City of Ottawa plans to back up its wind and solar power using a huge amount of batteries. But we all know batteries are made using cobalt, mined by children, 40 to 100,000 children in the Congo. This is destructive. The cobalt is then shipped in China. Again, disrupting human rights. The price tag is very hefty. I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I do not want to pay that price. Is Ottawa ready to support this?
The beauty of that question is it's following one of Alinsky's rules, which tell us you should hold your opponents to their own book of rules. Left-wingers always tell us they're concerned about social justice, okay? Social justice. Well, what about these children mining, breathing radioactive dust deep in dangerous mines in the Congo for cobalt, okay? So what is Catherine McKenney, who's the leader, who, you know, at that time was the leader in the election, what's she going to say? Oh, I don't care about the children in the Congo. We're going to electrify Ottawa. Or is she going to say, oh, well, maybe we won't electrify Ottawa, because the Congo is the major source of cobalt that you need in these batteries. Okay, so let's watch Catherine McKenney's answer. And you can see the discomfort, okay, because she's gone outside of Catherine's actual knowledge. Go ahead, please. Yep, I'll go back. Maybe you can play it. Okay, is it this one? Yeah. Okay, let me back up. Oh, I see. Yeah. Now remember, she's the leading candidate for mayor. She's the one that supported these programs.
Thank you, and thank you for that question. Absolutely, we can't just look to electrifying everything. We just can't look at batteries. If we're going to phase out fossil fuels, if we're going to meet our goals, we have to look at completely reducing our demand for energy, and we've got to look at increasing our use of renewable resources. But we can't just look towards electrifying all of our vehicles and using unsustainable practices that you outlined. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll bet she's very appreciative of that question, because she looked like she, A, didn't know what she was talking about, and B, didn't want to commit herself, because, you know, the city wants to electrify all the vehicles. Well, what did she just say? Well, we're not going to electrify them all. And we're going to see that again happened. Karen Bordeaux, who was, I believe she's with Action for Canada, I'm not sure, but she was one of our volunteers. She was a former teacher. And let's watch her question, because she does a similar thing. She knows much more than the person she's questioning, and she also is asking them something about which they really don't know what they're talking about. So here we go. The next one, please. Okay, they're worth hearing, because these are real people in action. And this is what we're going to do across Canada with Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy.
Thank you for that question. Absolutely, we can't just look.
In Ontario, there must be a distance of over half a kilometer from a wind turbine to a residential dwelling. Where is Ottawa going to put 710 industrial wind turbines taller than the Peace Tower? And what about the millions of birds and bats that these turbines kill? After all, one wind farm in California has killed thousands of golden eagles.
Okay, candidate McKenney.
Thank you. So I don't believe that there is space in the city for a massive amount of wind turbines. I just don't. I know that it's part of energy evolution. I know it's part of the plan, but I guess perhaps the way I framed it the last time, I really don't see it as being a substantive part of the plan. I don't honestly see wind farms occurring in the city. I think that we have other ways of we have other ways of, moving away from, fossil fuels. We have other ways of reducing our greenhouse gases and making sure that we have better energy products without wind. So I just wanted to make that clear. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. Pretty clear that she doesn't know what she's talking about, because, of course, she voted in support of the plan that's going to put wind turbines everywhere. Now, it was interesting that in a later debate, she said that, well, because this was brought up a few times actually, like these wind turbines are insane. And somebody else brought it up and she said, well, it's actually, mostly solar and energy distribution. Well, one of the people that we were working with, Mindy Thomas, okay, she was awesome. She actually brought in this particular rule. It's called ridicule, okay? Ridicule is man's most potent weapon. It's hard to counterattack ridicule, and it infuriates the opposition, which then react to your advantage. That's one thing that Mindy engaged in. The other thing she did was this. Pick a target, freeze it, personalize it, polarize it. Don't try to attack an abstract group like the city is doing such and such. You attack the individual person. Okay, so what Mindy Thomas did is she combined these two rules into this question. She said, you said in several previous debates that wind power was more significant than solar, or sorry, the other way around. Solar was more significant than wind, and that it was, distribution. She said, that is deceptive and wrong. And then pause, okay? So, it's very important you say this right so it sinks in. She said, energy distribution has nothing to do with the source. It has to do with how you distribute the energy through the city, but it turns out that wind power is triple solar in the plan. So what McKenney said was completely contrary to the plan that she supported. So here's the question that combines ridicule and personalizing. The question was this: did you vote for a $57 billion plan without reading it first? Now, the interesting thing that happened here, oops, I won't show you the result yet. The interesting thing that happened here is Rogers TV, who were given the contract, I presume it was a contract, certainly the mandate to actually film and broadcast the mayoral debates, they took out of the mayoral debates that question. They deleted it out, okay? They also deleted out another question, a similar one that used ridicule and personalizing, which also made McKenney look bad. So clearly they were in favor of McKenney winning the election. Well, guess what? We had one of our volunteers for Action for Canada actually come to these debates because we thought that might happen. So we videotaped the debates and we put it up on our website with the headline, "Here's what Rogers deleted from the debate." Now, of course, the first thing that happens when people are told you can't hear something is they want to see what they can't hear. Well, we compounded that because I contacted PJ Media in the United States. Most Canadian media would never do this, but PJmedia.com, a wonderful outlet, they get 5 million readers per month, and I told them what happened, and they said, well, write an article about this deletion, okay, and we'll put the actual videos on our website. Remember, this is a website that gets 5 million readers per month. Now, if it had just been broadcast on Rogers, community TV, maybe 500 people would have seen it. But we estimated that 100 times more people saw it because it was censored. So you have to be smart, okay? Not just apply the rules, but you got to have a backup, which we certainly had. This is the result. Just the night before the election, Catherine McKenney's diehard supporters didn't die off. They still voted for Catherine McKenney. But other people were saying, oh my God, if we bring her in, we're going to have $250 million Cadillac bike paths. We're going to have wind turbines everywhere. This is insane. And so what happened is people who were going to vote for other candidates, and there were a dozen people in the election, they suddenly switched their vote to the second place person, who was Mark Sutcliffe. And so overnight, Mark Sutcliffe soared to getting more than half the vote with a field of 12. Okay, so this is pretty incredible. To get more than half the vote with a field of 12, it blew her away. And Mark Sutcliffe is now the mayor. Now, the activists really played a role. According to Joseph Benamy, who some of you may know, he's a conservative strategist, he said that while there were several factors that led to McKenney's defeat, for example, the police association were very much against her because she supported defund the police, but he said that the outspokenness at debate after debate after debate. In total, I think, of the roughly 25 questions that were asked at the mayoral debates, we had half of them. Okay, so person after person were bringing up these points. So he says what we did had a big effect. Now, since the actual mayoral debates are over, Sutcliffe is now actually, he's running the city, and they're actually having what they call delegations. And I won't play these because we don't have time. But again, we're organizing people to go and give a 5-minute delegation. And at one particular meeting, we had 6 people. Okay, it's pretty good. So one after the other after the other. Now, speaking out also at other community meetings. Finally, we did publish a science report, which showed that the whole thing was pointless, okay? I mean, I sent the emissions reductions to an expert in the United States who runs the MAGIC model. He thinks that humans are causing dangerous climate change. I said, if Ottawa ceased to exist completely by the year 2100, what would be the change in temperature for our price tag of almost $60 billion? He came back with the answer. 1/10,000th of 1 degree. And that was one of the questions, by the way, which was censored out by Rogers and we publicized. So Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy contacted me and they said, hey, what you did in Ottawa, whoa, we want that to happen in other cities across Canada. So I've just started working with them, and they have on their homepage, as I say, replicate across Canada. I'll get back to that in a second. Let's see, just go ahead to their homepage. Right at the bottom here, in the lower right, is something says, become a Pathfinder. So we want everybody who's interested in this, regardless of whether you want to speak out, even if you just want to be kept informed, click on that and fill in the form and join our database to become a Pathfinder. We'll keep your name confidential, of course, but you'll be kept entirely up to date on what we're doing, okay? Because we want to see this happen across Canada. Many politicians have never seen a parade they don't want to lead. So we are going to create the parade. I'm just going to go back and talk about a couple of things. CSCP will provide Canadians with CSCP, Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy. It's a nonprofit, by the way, just created. We'll provide Canadians with information that enables them to judge the feasibility of current climate policies, etc. Okay, so that's what they're trying to do. And in particular, providing training. Now, the thing Alinsky did is he trained trainers, okay? He didn't train thousands and thousands of people. And ultimately, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be teaching people how you train activists. Because the left have done this for years. I mean, think of it. Al Gore has a training camp, and he sends them out all over society. Well, it's about time we did the same thing, too. We're building an organization of volunteers. That's what CSCP says. In Canada, we want you to sign up as a Pathfinder. And in particular, this is a great time to do it because climate alarmism is being questioned in Europe. And in particular, there was a huge loss of the Green Party, okay? And this is largely because of these incredible costs. And in particular, the tax and clean, what do they call it? The clean fuel standards, which is a joke, of course, because they're calling carbon dioxide unclean. The bottom line is people are starting to notice in Canada. So this is a good time from that point of view. And also, 3 leading physicists, 3 of the leaders in the world, just came out with the following statement. They said, the UN IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is not a scientific organization because it doesn't follow the scientific method. And they explain very clearly why that is the case, and it should not be used as a foundation for government policy. And this letter is on the sensiblechange.ca website. I have my own business cards and also sensiblechange.ca, so do pick them up. And we hope people will join in to help them publicize and get public support against net zero. So that's what we're planning to do, and I'm very happy to take questions.
Tom, I want to ask you, the new mayor of Ottawa, did he tear up the document? Did he tear up the policy? Or is he one of those guys that's hiding in the weeds?
Well, he's slightly left of center, but he's a sensible person in general. And so what he's doing is not very public. And so, we don't want to basically pin anything on him, but you can see a de-emphasis, generally speaking. And I can tell you privately later what's really going on behind the scenes, but the bottom line is, it's not Catherine McKinney. Okay? So we don't have an insane mayor. We have a person who's relatively sensible and has a balanced perspective. So that's about all I'll say publicly.
One final question. Can I speak with you after to get some information about how to present these kinds of things at my little group? Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. One of the subsets, so to speak, of pathfinders are people that will be called trailblazers. Okay, these are people who not only will get up to the mic and ask questions at public meetings, but who will give presentations. Okay, that's what Al Gore trains his people to do. We'll help them prepare slides, we'll get them engagements to speak in different locations, and yeah, that's what we're definitely going to do. Get people out there speaking, giving presentations, showing 1.2 degrees in 144 years. That's not really a climate emergency.
This other question. Go ahead, Andre.
I'm wondering if you've heard of Carmen Crowe, who's just outside of Ottawa, who speaks all over the world against the windmill. She's done a peer-reviewed report that's been well received, and she has done a lot of research on the harms that the windmills are doing on family farms, etc. Are you aware of her?
There we go. Yeah, I have heard of her.
So you've been in contact?
What I should do, I should get her on my radio show.
She's my older sister.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I should get her on my radio show because this week we have an energy expert on AmericaOutloud.news. It's the podcast that will be broadcast actually tomorrow night at 8 p.m. And if you just go there sometime in the next week, you'll see it. But the bottom line is she'd be an excellent guest, so I'll have to get her contact coordinates.
All right, I'll get that to you later.
Thank you.
We've got time for one more question, if anybody'd like a question. If not, we'll just, I assume we have Mark Moran. Let's give Tom a big thank you. We'll give Tom a big thank you. And there's thank you, Tom. When we get the end of Mark Morano's presentation, we've got another, I think, 15 minutes where we can ask either of you questions. So if people think of any questions for Tom, you'll get one more chance to ask him. And then, of course, there's the breaks and everything. So thank you very much, Tom. You were right on time. We appreciate that. And Mark Morano, is he getting any closer, David? Is he? The last time Mark Morano presented, he was at COP, whatever number they were on then. He was somewhere in Egypt, and he stopped at an airport. He presented to us, if you remember, 18 months ago. He was in somewhere in Egypt. He's getting closer. He's in Virginia now, and we were hoping to get him here, but it just didn't work out for us. But we always find him to be one of our most entertaining presenters. Can you hear me, Mark? We can. Well,
I seem to have. Okay, hold on. I'm starting to have some.
Did you hear me telling
my camera? Hold on.
Yeah. There we are.
There we go.
Hold
on. 1 sec. Let me check that again.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Hold on. 1 sec. 1 sec.
Okay.
All right. I was hoping this background. Hold on. I will be with you momentarily. 1 sec.
Okay.
All right, there we go. Got to share my screen. I got a PowerPoint. Well, thank you for having me. Appreciate it. And by the way, you mentioned Egypt. Here's one of our hats we used at the UN conference when we went into the museum to demand in our version of Just Stop Oil. We did our Just Say No to Net Zero stunt when we were at the Egypt UN conference. Well, thank you, Danny. Tell me when I can start and tell me what's going on. Are we ready to go?
Well, you can start. I was just saying, I don't know if you heard me say, like, you're getting closer. We were wishing we'd got you all the way here, but thank you very much for taking time to present from Virginia. You've got about 40 minutes, and I was telling Tom we'll have a question and the answer at the end of that. I guess you've got about 30 minutes to talk, and go ahead. We're interested to hear what you have to say. We're talking about, I think the topic we gave you was, yes, they are coming for you, and so go ahead. We'll be interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you, Danny. All right, I want to share my screen, and right now it says host disabled it. Can you allow it so I can share my screen? I need to share my screen, but anyway, is anyone listening? Okay. Anyway, I hope you all are doing well. I have a PowerPoint. This is now 2024 is perhaps the turning point of this whole madness from which we have been dealing with. As he mentioned, I'm sharing my screen right now. Just give me a moment here. As Danny mentioned,
Mark, you should be able. There we are. Are we
all right,
share
I got it
screen now?
Yes.
Good.
I got it now. Yes. All right. I've updated my presentation here with the latest stuff. So just give me one moment so I can get this started. All right. Can you see anything? Are you guys seeing anything? Do you see my video, my PowerPoint? Hello. I'm hearing silence.
Okay. Yeah, we can hear you, Mark. My mic was off here, so we can see you. It says the Great Reset Climate Agenda,
Okay,
Red Deer,
great. All right,
Canada.
let's get
Thank you.
started. I don't want to take any more time. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. I wish I could have been there in person today. This has been an incredible year so far. I'm going to start with the good news of what's happening around the world and what this all means. And I'm going to tell you how they're doubling down their efforts to impose tyranny upon the world under the guise of net zero, which I call Soviet-style central planning. It's a redux. My title is The Great Reset Climate Agenda. This is Red Deer for July 5th. These are my 3 books. You guys may be familiar. Politically Incorrect, The Great Reset, Green Fraud. The Great Reset is the most recent and combines all the latest elements of climate, public health tyranny, net zero, all into one package of what they're trying to do. All right, let's start with the good news in 2024. This is the good news. This is Politico magazine just a couple weeks ago. The EU's plan to ban gas cars may be key to the stunning results from European elections, the EU elections. People don't like messing with their cars. I was just in Vienna, Austria a few weeks ago, and I talked to many of the Europeans about their recent election. I also just recently, in the same trip, testified to the Polish parliament about the evils of net zero. And I can tell you right now, there is a rebirth of reality hitting Europe. They are fighting back against the Green New Deal, against net zero. This is good news. Nigel Farage now is decimating the Conservative Party in the UK, which is another good development. And hold on one sec. Okay. So this is the June elections. This is CNBC. Europe's climate ambitions thrown into doubt. The rise of the right threatens the net zero ambitions. We could not have asked for anything better. Europe and perhaps the U.S. This is Politico. Europe and the Greens take a beating at the polls. Is the U.S. next? We can only hope, and I would add to that, is Canada next? Can we see finally the end of Justin Trudeau's tyranny? I don't know for the answer to that. This was yesterday's Politico, and I wanted to share this with you at the opening of my talk. The, quote, far right in France is risking paralyzing the European Union's Green New Deal. Let's all have it here. Yay! This is what elections have consequences. Let's take a look at this article. This is supposed to scare the hell out of you about the EU, about France's elections and the Green Deal. According to Politico, they quote a EU diplomat saying, this is crazy stuff and it's really dangerous, the fact that the far right are threatening the Green Deal in Europe. They would probably break EU law to do away with the Green New Deal. It's all crazy stuff and really dangerous. On the bottom, France's leadership role would likely go to -10 on climate. That's why everybody's freaking out. And what they're freaking out about is apparently the EU has made it illegal to oppose the Green Deal. So if any country tries to bail out, it's automatically illegal. How dare you? And that's exactly what you would expect from entrenched bureaucrats, making it impossible to violate any of their edicts or orders. Here's how incredible this year has been for climate change activists and people being red-pilled. I interviewed 2014 RFK Jr. That's me interviewing him at the New York City Climate March. He's now running for president as an independent, and he actually sounds quite reasonable. Listen to what he says. In 2014, first of all, he wasn't reasonable here, but now he does. But in 2014, he told me that he thinks it's treason if you support fossil fuel energy and are a skeptic of climate. He thought energy CEOs should be jailed at The Hague at 3 square meals in a cot. And he wished a law you could punish skeptical politicians under who don't buy the United Nations climate scares. Fast forward, 2023 and 2024. RFK Jr. has been red-pilled. He declares that climate is being exploited by the World Economic Forum and Bill Gates in the same way that COVID was exploited. Top-down totalitarian controls on society. People now see climate as just another crisis that's being used to strip mine the wealth of the poor and enrich billionaires. Bingo! RFK Jr., the man who wanted to jail energy CEOs and punish climate skeptics, is now declaring that climate has been hijacked. He's gone further and said he won't even talk about climate during his presidential campaign. That, my friends, is progress. That is because of activists like you in Canada, the United States, throughout Europe. We're making a difference. We're getting to the most hardened climate activists and making them reverse course. Washington Post. This is March 7th of 2024. Amid explosive demand, America is running out of power. AI and the boom in clean tech manufacturing are pushing America's power grid to the brink. The mainstream media now realizes that we are facing energy shortages. And they didn't say it in this article directly, at least in this headline, that it's because of green energy and banning of fossil fuel, but they're noting that AI is taking over. Let's continue. BlackRock CEO Larry Fink this year this is in April, at a World Economic Forum event, destroyed net zero because it was forced to admit reality because of these artificial intelligence power demands. This is Larry Fink. The world is going to be short power, and to power those data centers, you cannot just have intermittent power like wind and solar. You need dispatchable power, unquote. Larry frickin' Fink, the head of the CEO of BlackRock, is now admitting that wind and solar are intermittent and can't power diddly squat. And it took AI power demands to make him say it publicly at a World Economic event. This is progress. Make no mistake. Al Gore has all but disappeared from the national stage. You can't find him. It's very rare. He might pop up at a UN climate summit, but I think we have a reason now. We can explain Al Gore's disappearance. According to CNN, during the summer and heat waves, extreme heat is the reason people are keep disappearing. So if any of your loved ones, your enemies, anyone you know, you can't find them anymore, blame climate-induced heat waves. But it's doing a good cause, because you don't see much of Greta anymore unless it's off on other wacky causes. She's not very quiet on climate these days. And same with Al Gore. So this is good news. Plus, John Kerry left his climate envoy position. Maybe he's a victim of the extreme heat that he warned us about. This is an actual headline. Whole study claiming, actually not a study, it's speculation, claiming extreme heat is making people disappear in Greece. This has never been about the science. Just to remind you, Rutgers University professor several years ago, to save the climate, we need to give up demand for constant electricity. And that's been the goal, to create energy rationing in order to make us easy to command, more pliable, more submissive. The UK power chief has admitted the era of constant electricity is ending. Families will have to get used to having power only when it's available. And this next one on the left is my favorite. The Los Angeles Times actually had a staff writer on the paper. Would an occasional blackout help solve climate change? They want to have intentional government blackouts in order to meet climate goals and allegedly lower our emissions to stop climate change. It would solve climate change. All we need is a few intentional blackouts. This is the world which we still live, no matter what reality. So instead of focusing on how we get more energy, we literally restrict energy. Again, Washington Post, America running out of power. Look at these projected power demands for US, Canada. It is going to boom partially because of all these AI power demands, partially because the world needs energy. By the way, these AI data centers they're building, AI is a very big, the only silver lining of AI that I can find so far is it's exposing the fraud of green energy, solar and wind, with BlackRock CEO admitting it. And they're not even going to be able to stick to the fiction of going solar, wind, and continuing these mandates. They want AI in order to have essentially replace the workforce, robotic workers, more control over you and I, there could be a lot of good coming from AI, but in the hands of the people that have AI, particularly big tech, it's a dangerous situation. Moving along, this is China, India, developing world. They're not going green. Just look at how the CO2 emissions have changed since the year 2000. And you can see that US, Europe, Canada, we are in a situation where we don't matter. And CO2 still goes up. Look at China, 208%, India, 155% increase. And of course, this is after $22 billion a year in the United States alone. This is how we prevented CO2 from rising. The atmosphere doesn't give a flying F about UN climate summits, about how much money we spend on net zero or the Green Deal, or about Justin Trudeau's carbon tax. It just doesn't matter. That's not even talking about whether CO2 affects the climate or extreme weather, none of which is hurricane, flood, tornadoes, wildfires. None of that's increasing. $22 billion a year, and they can't even slow the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere. Need I remind you, solar, wind, not greens. Look at the 1970s. Save the trees. We love trees. 2020s, screw the trees as they clear them for the solar panels and windmills. And by the way, same can be said of the species. Save the species in the 70s, screw the species today, particularly the whales and offshore wind. Building solar and wind requires 10 times more mined materials than fossil fuel electricity generation. The Juice documentary, which I'd highly recommend to you, they debunked the claim to make one wind turbine, you have to extract 900 tons of steel, 2,500 tons of concrete, 45 tons of non-renewable plastic. Wind is failing despite mandates and restricting competition. And that's one of the most incredible things. It would be like a heavyweight fighter like Muhammad Ali saying, I'm the greatest of all time. And he went to go fight another heavyweight like Joe Frazier. And then they say, well, your opponent's been banned from the ring, so I guess we'll make you king. Solar and wind can't even win the fight when their competition is being regulated, restricted, and taken out of existence while they're being subsidized and mandated. So when it's always great to claim short-term success for your green energy when it's literally your competition's banned and the government is mandating and subsidizing you. But they can't even claim that because they're failing and still losing money. The use of fear to get this agenda is what's happening here. And I'm going to talk. Now we're going to the heart of my presentation. The Great Reset is the intentional collapse of energy, food, transportation, our free speech, property ownership, and the collapse of our financial system through massive debt, massive inflation, modern monetary policy, printing money, and just literally pricing the home through inflation of anything out of people. So you're more reliant on the government. The BBC, abuse of emergency power. This is Luke Kemp. The abuse of emergency powers also marked a descent from the Republic to empire in Rome, centralization of power, the Middle Ages. The entire Germany's Third Reich occurred during a state of emergency. Why do I bring this up? Because you have now the 200 medical journals, you have the World Health Organization, you have the United States government, all threatening to declare international and national climate emergencies, which would suspend normal democracies. In the case here in the United States, it would give Biden 140 new executive powers, and these powers would allow him to bypass democracy the same way COVID-like powers did, and the same in Canada. And so throughout history, emergency power decrees have been the greatest violators of human rights. In the U.S., the 2001 Patriot Act turned us into a surveillance state. The 9/11 surveillance, the 9/11 emergency, we're still living under that in the United States for terrorism. No sign of that leaving. COVID just ended only because we had a Republican Congress, and now they're threatening a gun violence emergency declaration and a climate emergency declaration, which again would bypass democracy. Here's the Democrat Senate leader urging Biden to declare a national climate emergency. The Washington Post, they just had another round of reports that he might do it. He might, if he wins re-election, you can almost guarantee it. In the United States alone, Joe Biden would get 130 new wartime-like powers. This is what's frightening about this agenda. And this is what the World Health Organization seeks with these pandemic treaties. And they want to morph climate change into a public health event. Climate lockdowns. The 2001 International Energy Agency report urged behavioral changes to fight climate, a shift away from private car use, upper speed limits, thermostat controls, limits on hot water. Again, these are the major organs of our society. UK government funded report, Absolute Zero, UK fires report, urged climate lockdown, stop flying, no construction of new roads, airport closures, stop eating beef, stop doing anything that causes emissions. And this was the shocking one, regulate carbon dioxide similar to asbestos. Now keep in mind, humans inhale oxygen, we exhale carbon dioxide, and this is a now government report calling for us to regulate what we exhale from our mouth, carbon dioxide, similar to the way we regulate asbestos. And I read the transcripts of the House of Lords of the Conservative Party debating this. There wasn't a single Conservative Party member back in 2019, 2020 who would challenge the premise of this climate emergency, challenge the premise of net zero. They were all saying, oh, well, you know, of course these are worthy goals, but maybe this is a little too, we should tone it down a little bit. That's how pathetic, and that's why Nigel Farage is gutting the Conservative Party in the UK. Let's hope that continues. The journal Nature, COVID lockdowns are key to begin personal carbon allowances. Restrictions on individuals unthinkable, have us more prepared to accept tracking and limitations to achieve a safer climate. In other words, use the COVID template to literally impose a climate version. British medical study, price hikes to fight. Notice all of these are the same. They're coming from the major organs of society, journal Nature, the International Energy Agency, the British Medical Journal. These are not some fringe sources. I'm not citing anonymous documents. I'm not citing some blogger. I'm not citing unnamed sources. I'm not citing secret documents. I'm citing the major organs of our society, academia, government, corporate media, international associations. They're telling us out loud what they plan on doing. COVID response, a template to climate change. This was 230 mainstream medical journals saying that the greatest threat to global public health is now climate change. So if we know climate change is a greater threat than COVID, imagine what they're willing to do once they declare this a public health emergency. The Great Travel Reset, you all know about the 15-minute cities beginning in Oxford. You can cut car use, placing restrictions on car journeys. Airline restrictions, this is BBC. France, so they've already begun. 2023, last year, France banned short-haul flights to cut carbon dioxide emissions. And the EU-wide, there's proposals to get flights of even less than 2.5 hours and really start going after 3 and 4 or 5 hour flights. They want to end airline travel for us, the peasants. Bloomberg News, the other tactic besides outright bans, no more cheap flights is the new reality. And look at the subheadline. Because of, quote, climate compliance laws getting stricter. In other words, they are restricting our freedom of movement slowly. That's the boiling frog. Every year, every month, those climate compliance laws get a little stricter and prices get a little bit pricier. Pretty soon, only the billionaire class with the private jets and the million and multimillionaire class will be able to afford their summer holiday abroad. CNN said the quiet part out loud. This is last fall, 2023. It's time to limit how often we travel abroad. Carbon passports may be the answer. Once again, I'm not presenting you some anonymous source, secret document. This is CNN. This is CNN telling you point blank that they don't want you to travel and they want to give you carbon passports monitored by the government that are going to severely limit your travel. And that means if you're going to somewhere for a funeral, you might get a pass once a year. If you're going for a vacation, you may have to go once every 3 years, depending on what government agency you have to get approval by. This is not a fantasy. This is the establishment telling you clear and loud exactly what they're planning. In 2023, the BBC actually had an article announcing, can living an ultra low carbon lifestyle be achieved by personal choice alone? In other words, you don't have a choice. They're telling you outright, corporate media, the BBC, that we have no choice but to live this austere lifestyle. In 2020, I think this is 2023, well, this is 2021, I believe, is the original BBC article. BBC promoting a flying free world. Fresh fruits and vegetables would disappear from supermarkets in the winter, huge adjustments in supply chains. And here's what the BBC said about a flying free world. It's about when, not if. Don't you understand? The ruling class is committed to continually trying to impose this climate emergency cult belief upon us. You will go nowhere and be happy. Of course, this is the biggest and they're most successful so far in terms of restricting up until this point. Electric vehicles won't save us. We need to get rid of cars completely. Once again, corporate mainstream Business Insider magazine. That's from there. Daily Mail, this was Boris Johnson's transport secretary. Owning a car, outdated 20th century thinking. We must move to shared mobility. They are telling you in every possible way they're coming for your freedom of movement. At the World Bank, Nicholas Stern, the former head of the World Bank, at a meeting, floated the end of conventional sales. He urged clarity on timescales for stopping the sale. Now, this is the global international financiers at a market indicating to automakers they're not going to get financing if they continue to make gas-powered cars. If they do continue to make it, well, this is, let me go over here. This is political. If they do continue to make it, they're now talking about banning. Australian Bank and other corporate banks are announcing they will ban loans for gas-powered or petrol, diesel cars in order to fight climate change. So even if the automaker says we're going to still make it, we'll get financing, they make it, and you buy it, you may not be able to get a car loan because corporate banks are colluding with the climate agenda to stop you from getting a car loan. Politico, this is from March of this year, I believe, or April. German transport minister threatened indefinite driving bans on the weekend because the transportation sector was over limit for their net zero targets. This is the world in which we live, where some unelected bureaucrat can literally openly float the idea of banning your driving on the weekend and have it enforced. This is not a world in which we want to live in. California is asking their electric vehicle owners to limit charging due to heat waves. This was last year, a year and a half ago. And of course, this is Babylon Bee headline. State with no electricity orders everyone to drive cars that run on electricity. We are borrowing the West, Canada, United States, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, borrowing from Cuba and East Germany. There you see on the left the 1950s cars that are left over in Cuba. And on the right, you see the crappy East German Trabant. And we are no different than the East German government under Erich Honecker, who decreed that East Germans can only have one government-approved car, the crappy Trabant, which would be on waiting list 5, 10, or more years. And this car is now equivalent to what they're doing with EVs. They're telling us we can only have one government-approved car, an electric vehicle, and they're going to start restricting and banning beginning certain years ahead, 10 years. They keep pushing it off, but they mean it. They're trying to ration our vehicle choices. Even if you get a car loan, even if the cars still make it, even if you manage to get it, we now have collusion going on in cities and states across the United States beginning. They're banning the building of new gas stations to intentionally create gas station shortages. Colorado cities banning new gas stations. California cities banning new gas stations. They're doing it under emergency decrees to make, and they want to make it permanent. So now they're trying to make it so that you're going to be in long 1970s style energy shortage gas lines. Once again, to ration your freedom of movement. China, of course, is the winner in all of this. This is Business Insider. Say goodbye to the U.S. car market as we know it. Cheap Chinese electric vehicles are coming. China's EV surge threatens legacy automakers from GM to VW. And by the way, the EU is considering tariffs on these Chinese cars. But we've literally handed China the market by banning gas-powered cars, putting all these restrictions and all the coming bans. All we've done is say, China, take over the global auto market. And China is already surpassing the United States, South Korea, on their way to not being the number one EV maker, but probably the number one automaker in the world unless we stop this. Food. The great food reset. Food restrictions and climate change. This is Reuters News. John Kerry has announced in the United States that farming has now got to come under net zero. Slashing farm emissions is critical. The Great Root Feed Reset, the Irish government sacrificing 200,000 cows to reach U.S. net zero goals. In the United States, this is Politico magazine, China, again, mainstream sources, China is buying up American farms. Here's a U.S. congressman. The current trend is leading toward creation of a Chinese-owned agricultural land monopoly. And again, China was actually beat by none other than a homegrown American, Bill Gates. NBC News reported Bill Gates is now America's largest single farmland owner. Bill Gates is not the one in overalls. He's not the one on the tractor doing the farmer. He's the landlord here. NBC News reporting that. And this is akin to feudal serfdom. This raises the specter of farmers unable to afford climate compliance, net zero regulations, methane restrictions, nitrogen restrictions, being forced to sell their farms to equity assets, firms, billionaires. And Bill Gates comes in, and Bill Gates is magnanimous. He's not the one in overalls, according to NBC News. He's the landlord. He may even let that farmer stay on the land he once owned and lost because of climate rules that Bill Gates is pushing, and Bill Gates is a new landlord. It's a new form of feudal serfdom with agriculture as people are forced off the land, and their new landlords are equity asset firms and billionaires. What is Bill Gates' agenda? Why does Bill Gates want to be number one farmland owner? Rich nations should shift entirely to synthetic beef. This was what he told MIT Technology Review. Notice everything I'm saying again. I have to pound this point. Mainstream corporate academic sources. Nothing I'm telling you today is anonymous, secret documents. It's all what the establishment is saying out loud. They're not hiding what their plan is for you and I, the peasants, the unwashed masses. What does Bill Gates mean by synthetic meat? He's talking about vegetable oil processed meat, but he's also talking about test tube meat, lab-grown meat. He and Richard Branson are betting lab-grown meat will be the food of the future. Jeff Bezos has pumped $60 million into making lab-grown meat as well. So you got three billionaires, Bill Gates, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, at the forefront of pushing you to eat lab-grown meat. You're like, well, what the hell is lab-grown meat? Lab-grown meat is stem cells from a cow, sheep, or pig mixed with fetal blood, put into a petri dish, then into a steel vat, allowed to fester. It grows into an amorphous blob. Eventually, it's added texturing, coloring, other additives, antibiotics. It looks like pink slime with McDonald's chicken nuggets, and it's processed out, and it's eventually printed on a 3D printer. Lab-grown meat moves closer to American dinner plates. Actually, in 2023, the U.S. FDA, Food and Drug Administration, approved for the first time in United States history lab-grown meat for human consumption. Europe has approved it. I believe Europe has approved it, actually. I had to check that one. But New Scientist, lab-grown meat 25 times worse for the climate than beef. What is it? It basically means you can end all animal agriculture. Bill Gates, let's go back one time. He thinks that we need to move farming from the land into the laboratory, which will be funded by these billionaires. The Great Diet Reset, the World Economic Forum promotes this lab-grown meat and fake meat, printing 3D printers that produce 6 kilograms of meat an hour. Hey, what's for dinner, honey? Well, I'm printing it up right now. Oh, it's a juicy porterhouse steak. 3D printed meat, Israeli company unveils lab-grown beef chunks. Again, this is a 3D printer with perhaps the most processed food. You talk about ultra-processed food. That's what they're promoting here because they want to end animal agriculture. Nature magazine, major mainstream source. Eat less meat, UN climate change. Americans may have to say goodbye to steaks and burgers as beef costs rise. They're trying to increase the cost. Fart vax for cows. This is just an article from last month. Startup raises $26 million for vaccine to stop cow farts and burps. They're coming after cheap, available meat. Animal agriculture. Make no mistake, even if you vote them out, you still have to deal with corporate government collusion. This is Europeans are now allowed, I love this, allowed to eat cricket powder and small mealworms. Like, can you imagine there are huge lines of people, why won't they let us eat? Oh, we're finally allowed, we can eat cricket powder. Italy has banned insect flour from its pasta. Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, said there will be no bugs in Italian pasta. And as an Italian, I salute her for that. CNN promoting cockroach milk as the protein drink you didn't know you've been missing. And this is my favorite, UK Times. Add ants. Ants add caramel and nutty flavors to dishes. Like, that ice cream, I wish I had some caramel. Well, we have some ants. Let's sprinkle some on. Ooh, that tastes nutty and caramely. Yummy. This is the UK Independent. Could beer made from urine help water shortages? Why not? This is Scientific American. You are the pollution they want to eliminate. Human pee is a problem pollutant in the U.S. because it can contribute to warming. Basically, we're eating too much meat, which has too much nitrogen, which we're then peeing out too much nitrous oxide, which is the greenhouse gas, which is creating more global warming. We need to be eating like vegans, and then we could save the planet. Climate communism. Make no mistake. Write that word down. Climate communism. That is what we are facing. Make no mistake. Net zero is Soviet-style climate communism. This is Joseph Christof. Chairman Mao in China attacked farmers. Stalin attacked farmers. Now, world governments are attacking farmers. We saw it all throughout Europe. Hopefully the farmers in the recent elections can halt this. The same groups throughout history, it's a playbook. It's not a chance happening. Wake up. You make the people hungry, you make the people more compliant. It's that simple. You weaken them. You create chaos. You allow conditions for more government control. You will own nothing, but someone else will own it all. First, they came for your energy, then your SUV, and now houses pose more danger to the climate than vehicles. You know what they want to do with vehicles, right? They're banning them. UK Times is now warning about houses. We're looking at more zoning regulations, 15-minute cities, high-rises. They want to end suburban and rural living. Rethinking home ownership. This is UCLA professor, academia. Given the scope and scale of the climate crisis, we need another kind of a route, a way away from the ideologies of ownership and property and toward a more collective health just cities. They want to abolish car ownership and now home ownership. You're coming for your water rights as well. I interviewed Elizabeth Nixon, as a Canadian, by the way. Very good author. I think her book was called Eco Fraud or Eco, I can't remember the exact title, from 2012. Just recently interviewed her. Great water reset. You will have a daily water allowance, 1 shower a day, no lawns, limited gardens. The state will meter it all. UN and EPA water edicts will give government control of every runoff, ditch, and puddle. And as Canadians, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The bottom is interesting because it says the Wall Street is now colluding, planned theft of America's land and water. Everything will be monetized, measured, traded, even you. There's a whole nature rights movement that's turning lakes, rivers, trees, land masses into natural assets that can be bought and traded by equity asset firms and Wall Street, which makes it off limits to private individuals. It's basically a rape and theft of our land by government and corporate interests. You can be diagnosed now for suffering from climate change. You guys know this well. The British Columbia doctor was the first to clinically diagnose a patient as suffering from climate change. She had a heat stroke. What does this mean? Well, we now have calls. Australia National University, climate change is a killer. Let's add it to death certificates. They want climate change to be doctors, and there's a whole group of doctors now, it's grown, that are diagnosing patients as suffering from climate change. You can die from climate change. It'll now be on your death certificate if they get their way. Of course, the reality destroys that claim. Since 1920, there's been a 199% drop in climate-related deaths. So the idea that everyone's dropping dead of climate change or climate-related is completely in the fantasy realm, but that doesn't stop them. The wacky world of climate, this is just where we are. This was the most recent updates here. Cars, appliances, pizza, homegrown food. Carbon footprint of homegrown food is 5 times greater. They don't want you growing your own food. They want you eating ultra high processed food from the grocery store that's government approved to keep you unhealthy, sick, bring on the diabetes and obesity. Indoor house plants come with a cost to the planet. They don't like those either. Humans are fueling global warming by just breathing. This was an actual peer-reviewed study, and I have a copy of the abstract from the journal on the right here. And this article actually says that they broke it down in identity politics. Africans emit more warming agents in their breath than Asians, and women have more hot air than men. I'm not going to touch that one, but that's science. You can't argue with science, but this is frightening stuff. Humans are now classified, human breath, as a pollutant that's destroying the earth. New paper, regulators should value non-human animals, seek to estimate the number of dog years saved by a regulation. This is some of the new criteria they're coming up with. This is actually a peer-reviewed paper in a journal from February of 2024. And they're arguing that we should have a new metric, how many dog years are saved by a regulation. In other words, you can't even invent anything new if there's any human cost that they can come up with a model and try to scare you with. Will you support net zero if I told you? This is some of their tactics to scare you. How climate change is hitting vulnerable Indonesian trans sex workers. Actual story, Reuters News did this, carried by the UK Independent. Believe me, this reporter is going to win every journalistic award. This is only from about 2 months ago, 2024. They got climate in there, great virtue signal. They got Indonesia in there, which is a developing nation. And they got transgender in there, which is the new, virtue signaling, politically correct thing, woke. And they got sex workers, another vulnerable group. That hit like every bell here. They're going to win awards for this story, trying to scare you that we need to go all net zero, Green New Deal, because trans sex workers can't make money due to climate change. The Washington Post, latest article, this is from May, about 2 months ago. Climate Solutions reporter touts taking cold showers to save the climate. It's a climate solution. That's an actual title. This is a Climate Solutions reporter of the Washington Post promoting cold showers. Human hair. The Washington Post is coming for your hair. They tout recycling human hair into clothes as a climate solution. Again, this is this year, 2024. Weaving with human hair keeps hair out of landfills and incinerators where it would release greenhouse gases. And look at how bonkers this has come. Look at the right here. The Washington Post is reporting that this startup group is trying to turn hair swept off the floors of salons and barbershops into fabric for clothes. Is it far-fetched to imagine Canadian and U.S. children on a climate field trip going to barbershops to sweep up human hair in order to save the planet and stop that hair from being thrown in an incinerator and releasing greenhouse gases? This is the world in which we live in. And again, this is mainstream corporate America. They came for your gas, your car, your hair, your houseplants, and now your lunch. This was a study claiming that gas stoves, cooking a grilled cheese sandwich on a gas stove is more toxic than breathing in car exhaust fumes. So this is where we are. You are the carbon they want to eliminate. This is the New York Times Magazine. Earth now has 8 billion humans. This man wishes there were none. The voluntary human extinction movement has arrived and is getting glowing reports in the New York Times. If to his credit, he doesn't want to kill people already in existence. He just wants us not to reproduce so that we disappear and die off and go extinct as a species. All right, wrapping up. Next target is your kids. Is having a baby pure environmental vandalism? Can I see a show of hands of everyone here who's engaged in environmental vandalism? All right, very good. Well, this is what they're coming. Homes, cars, meat, kids. If you do have kids, according to the New York Times, you should only have short kids. Actual story, New York Times, there has never been a better time to be short. They actually reported that if you mate with shorter people, you get a greener planet, and to save the planet by shrinking the needs of subsequent generations. So if you're a young person and you're looking to get married, marry a short person if you care at all about the planet upon which you live. You no longer have a choice. John Kerry's daughter, who is the climate health envoy at the World Health Organization, declared in 2024, you no longer have a choice. We must accept there's no other way forward than to phase out fossil fuels. simply mitigation and reduction is no longer a choice. We no longer have a choice, according to John Kerry's daughter, Vanessa, who works for the World Health Organization. Well, the Atlantic magazine this year, 2024, and this was just back in May, is now touting degrowth communism. It's a theory that climate change is economically, they're saying that it's so popular, even though it's probably impossible. But this is what academia and corporate media is touting: degrowth communism. Remember, we're living in climate communism. All right, to finish. The New York Times has warned us that critical thinking leads to misinformation. So my urging to all you out there in Red Deer, don't go down the rabbit hole of critical thinking. It doesn't help in the fight against misinformation. Trust the experts. You must not do your own research when it comes to science. We are being warned how dangerous that is. Trust the experts. Questioning authority has become too much of a good thing, and it's killing people. Trust the experts. Time magazine is now making the case for making Earth Day a religious holiday. Stop asking questions, stop engaging in in critical thinking, and just worship the earth. Everything will be healed. Slate magazine says it's time to give up on facts, at least temporarily. Let's have 2 weeks to flatten the facts, lay them down in favor of a more useful weapon, emotions. That's what we should have been doing all along. Let's go with emotion. The hell with facts. Let's not allow 2024 to morph to 1984. And that, of course, George Orwell, shocked at how wrong his book was and how timid and mild his book was compared to reality. Economist Milton Friedman, one of the things he said before he died: free societies of the kind we've been lucky enough to experience, this is Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, of the last 150 years are a very rare exception in human history. Most people, most of history, have lived in tyranny and misery, unquote. Make no mistake, the goal of Justin Trudeau, the goal of net zero, the goal of President Biden, the goal of even people like Richie Sunak is to make you live in human misery and tyranny, because they support the policies that make that happen. If you're speechless after all this, that's because climate change has robbed you of your speech. Climate change is accelerating language loss, and that is according to the science. You can't argue with science. With that, I will conclude. I'd be happy to take any questions. Again, those are my 3 books, the most recent being The Great Reset, available at Amazon, where other books are sold. And that's how you can reach me, Morano, Climate Depot, my website. Thank you so much. Thank you, Danny, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Mark. I don't know if you could hear, you've got lots of rounds of applause through the course of the of your presentation. Does anybody have a question? Did you have a question, Paul? There's a mic there. It isn't hardly believable, is it, Mark?
No, it's not. Unfortunately, I couldn't hear anything. But yeah. I want to stop sharing. Have I stopped sharing or no?
No. Yeah, we can still hear you. That's fine. So, but you can put your picture, Paul's.
Oh, I got it. There we go. There you go. I'm back now. Okay, here you go.
Here's your question.
Well, grateful you could present to us again this year, Mark, and again, a whole lot of bunk. I can't believe there's so many articles that you put together, but the one that probably caught me the most is where they're saying that there's 5 times more damage to the climate if you grow your own food. Like, can you share that article a little bit on how they even make that outrageous
that
claim?
Article was about, you're making me, let me find it real quick. Yeah, that is that was from, I believe, the Washington Post. And what they're trying to say there is that, the carbon footprint of the fertilizer that you're using, of transporting the dirt and soil, and even anything that you would do to create that is causing that problem. So I don't have it in my head, unfortunately. I can't remember let me find it here. But let's go on to the next question, and I'll find that exact article, because there's so many like that about the food. One of them was, hold on one sec. Okay. The homegrown food is 5 times greater than those grown conventionally. Individual garden infrastructure is responsible for increased levels of CO2. It's from the UK Telegraph. And it's a study from University of Michigan. They looked at how much carbon dioxide was produced when growing food at different types of urban farms and found on average a serving of food made from traditional farms creates 0.07 kilograms of CO2. And of course, the impact of an environment is almost 5 times higher for vegetable patches or allotments in in individual gardens. So what they're saying is by doing small farms, it's not as efficient as doing a mass-produced farm, as near as I can tell from a quick reading of that. And that was let's see, that was an article from January of this year. So I hope that answered your question.
Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for coming out here, or, virtually coming out here today. One of the questions I have, regarding this whole climate apocalyptical messaging that's coming out there at us is, unfortunately, it doesn't even seem to matter if we have a friendly government or a non-friendly government. A lot of them are still going towards this whole carbon capture, things like that are still going to actually negatively affect the future of our industry, because they do have to be government subsidized, which means that I'm subsidizing it and everybody else in this room. So what do you think, like with the carbon capture, thing, how do we convince, I guess, that our industries, whether it's agriculture, oil and gas, whatever, to start steering away from this government funding that they're getting to put it in place, if they're not going to be able to sustain it in the future?
That is the hardest question of all, because what ends up happening is the government regulates these industries so greatly, affects their obvious profit margins, ability to do any kind of business, expand, go into different areas. In order to get any government regulatory cooperation, they have to play the government's game. And this is what we're finding with the automakers when it came to EV bans. They knew this wasn't going to fly. I mean, we had a Toyota vice president just come out this year and basically say, this isn't working. There's nothing we can do. It's not happening. But they had to basically still double down because they're afraid to upset the people who regulate them. And that's true whether you're talking food, transportation, even energy. They will go along because the government subsidies and mandates they can make. A lot of these companies can make money off of carbon capture. One of the biggest disappointments is, I guess his name is Pierre Poilievre, running against Justin Trudeau. I watch his videos on YouTube. I don't know much. I don't follow Canadian politics that closely. He sounds great. He's incredibly talented, but when it comes to climate, he's always bragging about, climate's essentially a problem, and we're going to be doing carbon capture, and we're going to be doing, I guess, harnessing wave energy. Something he was talking about, but it's disappointing. You need to have opposition leaders, and that's why I throw Richie Sunak in that. I don't know enough about Pierre Poilievre, but I just have been disappointed by some of his videos on climate. But you have to have the, quote, opposition leaders saying the correct narrative and telling you the truth, because even if the conservatives or the opposition leaders to Trudeau or the Labour Party in UK or anywhere in Europe or even the United States, if we had a Nikki Haley or a Mitt Romney or a John McCain, it's not going to change anything if they're too timid to stand up to the narrative and say no. To hell with net zero, to hell with carbon capture. It's a boondoggle. Here in the United States, carbon capture is nothing more than a campaign donation for Republican donors, and that's going to and Democrat donors, and that's the same with green energy. So it's very hard to kill. The way to kill it is the mass will of the people. Let's hope the EU elections are the start. Let's hope the US elections are the start. Let's hope the French elections are really leading the way. That seemed really powerful, what happened in France.
Yes. Go ahead.
I wanted to tell people about Climate Hustle 2. Fantastic film. Mark, how do people see Climate Hustle 2? They really should.
Yeah, you just go, actually the website is climatehustle2.com, and I believe it's available with the number 2 or the spelling out 2, and you can order it on demand. And I probably shouldn't say this, but there's probably some bootleg copies out there on YouTube and other places to watch it as well. It's a little different. The new movie, of course, is Climate the Movie by Martin Durkin, which was fantastic, and that's updated. It came out this year. But our movie was a little bit different because we go into a lot more of the pop culture and politics of the climate movement, and we add a lot of humor into it, as well as the science. So it gives you a different version of the climate debate, and I think you'll enjoy it. It's a great companion to that movie, and it stars the great Kevin Sorbo, and I'm also in it as a reporter, but Kevin Sorbo does a great job in that as well, the actor.
Okay, Yeah, I'm involved in agriculture, and there's been a product introduced into the cattle industry to reduce methane called Bovar, 3-NOP. It's like going to cost 40 cents a day, and it's the only product in Canada that's been approved by our Alberta Health Canada that says it may reduce. The word may reduce methane.
Yes.
It's never been used on any other approval, the word may.
Yeah,
It's
and
a
that's what we're
tax.
finding. There's a vaccine they want to come up with. There's all kinds of special diets. All it's going to do, just keep in mind, the goal here is not to reduce methane as much as it is to increase not only the regulatory burden and the costs for farmers, but just the daily drudgery of it. I mean, they're going to have to comply, paperwork. Did you give them this diet? Are you monitoring? They're going to have government monitoring of the methane emissions. We already have Al Gore partnering with Google to do satellites, tens of thousands of satellites around the world to check emissions from farms and factories. This is the goal, is to make everything more expensive, more difficult, more time consuming, and we even have companies now promoting, and King Charles has invested in one, the face masks for cows. It's not about that. They want to make meat rare and expensive. They want to force us into ultra high processed lab grown meat, the processed vegetable oil based meat, insects, and just more box food, if you will, from the factory. They don't want us eating healthy. They actually don't want us healthy because they think there's too many of us, and in order to make more money off us, sick, compliant people are much better. And this is why you have people like Yuval Harari from the World Economic Forum call us useless eaters, the masses, useless eaters, and says that we need to have psychotropic drugs and video games to keep us occupied when AI basically takes over most of the economy and jobs.
Good. I think us useless eaters are getting hungry, Mark, and so there's no one else standing at the microphone. But we have one more question. No, we're good. Okay. But
okay.
So thank you very much. We're very grateful to have had you here. When the next time you are with us, we'll buy you the best steak that we can make in Alberta, and you can eat as much of it as you want. We'll say goodbye for now. We're going to take a bit of a break for lunch, but just put your picture of your 3 books up on the screen so people get a chance to look at that while we're having our lunch and stuff. And thank you very much. We'll look forward to the next time we get to see you and be in person with you. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Freedom Talk.
Thank you, Mark. You're getting a great round of applause from a bunch of grateful people, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks. See you later. Okay, thank you. Well, we're almost to lunch. I just have a few announcements. As you know, we've got quite a few presenters around the room. So while we're going to take a quick break. I think lunch will be ready at 12, so we've just got just a few minutes. And Michael Wagner's at the back. He's got a whole selection of good books about what we could do in our future. I was telling someone yesterday, for about 25 years, my solution to every problem was public hangings, but I didn't get very much uptake on that. So now my solution to every problem is a separate country, and as luck would have it, about half the people that I know want to have public hangings. I said, well, that's fine. We'll have a separate country with public hangings. So I mean, so in any event, let me know if you want to sign my petition. But Ron, Tom, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to tell people I'll leave my business card for Canadians for Sensible Climate Policy out here, and we're really, really encouraging people. Do check out sensible-change.ca, because we're looking for lots of volunteers or even people that just want to learn about it.
And you mentioned signing up for the Pathfinder group too, which is another good thing. So yes, by all means do that. Leave your cards there. People can stop by and get one at lunchtime, and we'll go from there. Do you have a question or a comment? Go ahead. Go to the microphone, sir.
Fair enough. It was a question. I thought we were going to do maybe an extra second of Q&A or whatever, but question is for Tom, right? So I'm Kevin with the CHP, Christian Heritage Party. Is that okay to ask Tom? I wasn't sure. I'd like to have your comments on adjusting tactics, right? For all of us to get our message out, right? Because a few years ago we created a long format podcast for the CHP, and recently we've also adjusted that to take shorts, right? TikToks and YouTube shorts, taking those out because those things go viral. Tom, did you know your recent talk with us has gone viral, right? And it's like 45,000 hits, views, and more importantly, almost 6,000 likes from people, and almost 600 comments, and thousands of shares. So that's huge for us, first of all, right? Just for adjusting tactics, you know, one of our biggest message. What do you have to say for any of us to get our messages out as well and adjusting tactics? So thank you.
Yeah, well, the first thing I say, of course, is visit sensiblechange.ca, because it talks specifically about politics, about finance, the whole thing, and it's done in a very entertaining sort of way. I also suggest that people read Rules for Radicals, because what you'll see is this is how they took over our society. I mean, you read through it and you say, yeah, of course, that's exactly right. We should mob the mic. And you know, one of the things that our advisors, or I should say our volunteers did, is I told them, I said, when the question period opens, and you should all do this, I think, in any cause, whenever the question period opens, get to the mic immediately. A lot of people will say, oh, I want to wait, you know, I don't want to be the first one. Yes, you do want to be the first one, because it breaks the ice, and then you suddenly find other people in the audience who agree but are too afraid to say so, are then going to the mic. Call into radio talk shows right away at the beginning, and suddenly you find there's like an avalanche effect. And these are the kinds of tactics that are in Rules for Radicals. So I know he's not our friend, and he did some pretty awful things in some cases, but he was a genius when it came to organizing people to change society. And that's what we need to do. So read Rules for Radicals. That would be my main. And also visit the Christian Heritage and Friends of Science websites to get your information. Christian Heritage Party, their policies on climate change are perfect, absolutely perfect.
I don't know whether I'm allowed to do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. That's all right. Colonel Redmond and I are friends, I think. Tom talked about the rules for radicals. And I just want to point out something. If any of you are interested in knowing what Rules for Radicals was all about, it's simply a combination of Marxism. Someone mentioned communist, you know, the green communism. That's exactly what we've got today. If any of you are interested in purchasing a book, $16, come over to my table over here, $16, it's called Who Was Karl Marx? And every communist in the world is described in this book, including President Obama, including Biden, and all the other scum that we're putting up with today. So if you're interested in knowing something more about this and you're not familiar with it, please come and see me at the corner table. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tex. We're just a couple of minutes away from lunch. Lunch will be ready in just a few minutes around the corner. Like as I said, we've got lots of people. They've got books. We've got all kinds of information. We'll have a half an hour for lunch, and then at 12:30, Stockwell Day is here somewhere. Oh, I see him there. He's going to be talking about the war on prosperity. So how about if you just bear with me, rather than ask somebody to come up, I'll just ask the blessing, and then we'll take a couple of minutes. Oh, I should have said the washrooms are just down the hall to the right. There's washrooms, as you know, like 200 yards down the hallway that way, but